Chapter 2161. Young Master Song Feng was slightly taken aback. Then he laughed and said, "You two must be joking. That little girl is so skilled that she can come and go as she pleases in our building. How could I, a lowly person, possibly stop her?" Hu Shurchen looked at them with a grin. Where did she go? In the next second, that smiling expression disappeared and was replaced by an indifferent one. "If you don't speak honestly, I'll tear down your building in a bit." "Wah! I don't, sir." Emolien. He had a headache as he looked at these coy male escorts and reached out to press his aching head. His wifey running to this kind of place in the middle of the night was truly rebelling. "Young master, our spring full house is a legitimate business," the man in red shouted indignantly. "How can you be so unreasonable?" Young Master Song Feng blocked the red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and purple people who were filled with righteous indignation. He glanced indifferently at Emolien and Hu Shurchen and cupped his hands. "Masters, please don't play with this small shop anymore. That little girl just now followed someone to the rear courtyard. How about we go over and take a look now?" "Lead the way," Emolien growled impatiently. General Jia, whose face was flushed from drinking, suddenly interrupted angrily and asked, "Who is that little stoic to you? And who are you?" A severe glint flitted through Emolien's eyes. When everyone saw that General Jia wanted to recklessly reason with someone, they promptly reached out to stop him. General, calm down, General. Who are you?" Hu Shurchen leisurely swept that general a glance and raised the corners of her eyes. Unexpectedly, it was as if General Jia was possessed. When he saw Hu Shurchen's handsome face with a faint smile, he actually became absent-minded and wanted to pounce on her with a drooling face. "Beauty, this general is Shuntian Prefecture's Tiger Pendant Battalion's general." Slap. A heavy slap landed on General Jia's originally somewhat swollen old face. Everyone truly felt sorry for the general. Hu Shurchen's slap from a distance wasn't light at all. 2 teeth were swept out, and General Jia was so shocked that he screamed. That General Jia still wanted to say something, but unexpectedly another slap came on his right cheek. Pa! The slap landed heavily, knocking out 2 of his right big teeth. Now both sides of his face were symmetrical and swollen, squeezing his eyes into slits. Being beaten to the point of looking for teeth all over the floor. This was probably the kind of situation that the female orioles and swallows felt their hearts skip a beat and silently shut their mouths. How terrifying. "Hurry up and lead the way." Emolien glanced coldly at young Master Song Feng, feeling very unhappy. Without another word, young Master Song Feng turned around and walked towards the backyard. Everyone followed and went downstairs. When they arrived at the back garden, they saw a figure standing behind the rockery from afar. When the crowd walked over, they saw the young lady with her back facing them. She shouted angrily, "Yi Lingmin, why aren't you coming out? Why did you lead me here?" Emolien was about to quickly walk over when she suddenly saw the young lady pinch out a talisman seal. She suddenly raised her arms, and dozens of tracking talismans and revealing talismans scattered from her hands. Bang! When everyone heard the sound, they abruptly turned their heads and saw a figure appear beside the flower path. She was wearing Cyan Min's clothing, but the hat on her head was knocked to the ground, revealing a head of fine black hair. Sure enough, it was a woman. Did the little stoic miss barge into the house of spring for this woman? Young Master Song Feng was startled and raised his head to look ahead. Chapter 2162. The clear and cold moonlight shone on the green ripples at the edge of the pool. The little stoic turned around. On her snow-white face, her eyes were like 2 cold stars as she stared straight at the woman, who was sitting paralyzed on the ground. Her eyes didn't conceal the icy glint that resembled an icy bolt of lightning. "I let you off last time, yet you still dare to appear in front of me." The little stoic coldly said, "Yi Lingmin, today, I'll get rid of you this calamity on behalf of my sect." Arbor suddenly paused, and his gaze followed the faintly flowing moonlight and landed on Emolien. "Husband." The little fellow finally saw her dark-faced husband and floated to the man's side in a flash. She looked up at him and asked, "Why did you come?" "Haha." Ma Shurchen helplessly face-bombed and chuckled. Instead of sleeping in the middle of the night, You came to this red light district. It'd be strange if Emolien could sit still. When he mentioned this, the little stoic was immediately displeased. Husband, where did you run off to in the middle of the night? Emolien couldn't help but laugh in exasperation. This little fellow even learned to complain first when the guilty party was the victim. Tong came to find me to discuss something. Emolien reached out to pinch her small face with a grin. This isn't the main point. The main point is that when I returned to my room to take a look, my wifey actually disappeared. Arbor felt a bit guilty, and hastily turned his head to look at Yi Lingmin, who was still unable to move after being struck down by talisman energy. It's her. She threw a small stone at the window. She brought me here. Husband, this restaurant is really strange, the little stoic said softly, her fingers sliding over the back of the man's hand. You have to be careful. Restaurant. Everyone. Yi Lingmin clenched her teeth and suddenly moved. However, she didn't run away. Instead, she pounced at General Jia like a gust of wind. Jiawu, accept your death. General Jia narrowed his old eyes as he stared at the pouncing Yi Lingmin, and couldn't help but fly into a rage. Who are you? Without another word, Yi Lingmin stabbed her sword thrice. However, after being hit by the tracking talisman, she was forced to reveal herself. At this moment, she was still somewhat exhausted and weak, so the spiritual energy she sent out seemed to be somewhat weak. General Jia's skills were about the same as hers. Although he didn't have much ability to retaliate in front of the little stoic and Emolien, he could still deal with Yi Lingmin, an elementary rank spiritual cultivator. She kicked Yi Lingmin in the stomach, causing her to take a few steps back. Yi Lingmin turned to look at Arbor. Junior sister, take him down first. I'll let you punish him as you wish. Who is he? Arbor asked with a frown. On the surface, he is the general of Shentian Prefecture's Pung Tiger Camp. But according to my investigation, this person is the deputy commander of Gung Pengcheng's private army, the Shentian Guard. So that was the case. Yi Lingmin had probably lured her here to capture this Vice Commander Jia. Arbor released Emolien's hand and jumped in front of General Jia. General Jia was completely jolted awake by Yi Lingmin's fright. When he heard Yi Lingmin expose his identity, he was infuriated, but he was completely unable to stop her from continuing. After glancing at the little stoic, he abruptly turned around and wanted to escape. What kind of joke was this? This stoic face still had two formidable helpers. If he didn't leave now, when would he? Unfortunately, he had just turned around when his left leg was grabbed by a vine. He looked down and saw a green vine coiled around his left leg. Someone exerted force, and he was abruptly pulled to the ground. With a bang, he smashed into the ground like a dog eating shit. Chapter 2163. At this time, General Jia was probably cursing in his heart. A belly full of anger rushed out from the depths of his heart, and Jia Zhong angrily berated. You people, let go of this general. You dare to attack the general of Tigerping Camp? Aren't you afraid of incurring the anger of the entire Shentian Prefecture? Arbor sneered and thought. Even your Shentian Prefecture's prefecture master, Gung Pengcheng, has already vanished into thin air. What does a small general of Tigerping Camp count for? Let go of me. Arbor took out an ice sword glittering with cold light, and pointed it at Tigerping Camp's general, Jia Zhong, who was lying on the ground. If you talk nonsense again, I'll cut off your head and feed it to the dogs. Cut it off. Little junior sister, he's provoking you. Arbor naturally knew that Jia Zhong was provoking her to kill him, so she expressionlessly glanced at the man on the ground. Arbor's fingers moved slightly, and a pearl-sized white jade ball was flicked into Jia Zhong's mouth with a whoosh. Don't worry, you won't die for the time being. Withdrawing her ice sword, Arbor turned and returned to Emolien's side. Go back. Wait. Young Master Song Feng hurriedly stood out from the crowd and said with a frown. Little girl, General Jia is also a guest of our spring house. You can't take him away like this. Arbor glanced at him and suddenly turned her head, facing him with the back of her head. Hu Shurchen couldn't help but want to laugh. Every time the little guy was stubborn, he liked to face others with the back of his head. Emolien reached out to hold Arbor's little hand and looked down at her with a smile. Okay. Miss Chow inexplicably felt that Prince Mo's gaze was a bit scary. So strange, why did she feel a chill on the back of her neck? Was it her illusion? The crown prince clearly smiled so gently and looked like a gentle spring breeze. But she felt a bit gloomy. Illusion. She must be overthinking it. Out of the instinct of a small animal, the little girl, who sensed a bit of danger, suddenly raised her head and smiled sweetly at Prince Mo. Husband, I want a hug. Wuxia was speechless. The little girl was too cunning. Who could resist her? When this stoic little face suddenly changed into a smile, it was truly so sweet that it made one's heart follow along and form the 3 rivers of spring water, sparkling under the sunlight. One wished for nothing more than to hold the sun, moon, and universe in their hands, just to make her smile. Sure enough, Mo Lian was a bit dumbstruck as he watched. He subconsciously nodded his head, and naturally picked up the little fellow. Ah! Jiao Wu suddenly let out an extremely tragic cry. Everyone turned their heads to look, only to see that Jiao Wu's entire arm seemed to have rotted. The flesh peeling off inch by inch caused everyone to involuntarily feel a chill in their hearts. Yi Lingmin was also shocked and couldn't help but move to the side to avoid being stained by Jiao Wu's disgusting flesh. Arbor flicked his finger, and a bit of rune light flew into Jiao Wu's glabella. Suddenly, Jiao Wu's figure moved and he gave up struggling. He stood up woodenly and expressionlessly followed Prince Mo as he walked over mechanically. General Jia? Young Master Song Feng was startled. He carefully looked at Jiao Wu's face and saw that his entire face was old-fashioned and serious, without the slightest expression. It was as if he was instantly controlled by someone. Could it be a puppet rune? A bad premonition slid through young Master Song Feng's heart. Chapter 2164. If it was a puppet curse, depending on the level of the talisman, it could cause the victim to lose their self-awareness for 70 to 60 days, and the victim would have to obey orders obediently. Of course, it wasn't impossible if there was another talisman practitioner with more profound talisman power to help the victim undo the curse. It was just that the puppet curse that the stoic-faced little girl threw out seemed to be very impressive. Why did the little girl have a curse on her? Young Master Song Feng couldn't help but be a bit puzzled. Song Feng, are we going to let them go just like that? The gorgeous man in red looked at young Master Song Feng in astonishment. Young Master Song Feng glanced at him. What else? Are you going to rush up and stall them? Then I'll send people to the prefecture head to ask for reinforcements? The gorgeous man in red chuckled. Then forget it. What a joke. If he really dared to rush up, wouldn't he be torn into pieces by that fierce little stoic? Yi Lingmin followed them silently all the way to the inn's entrance. Only then did Arbor turn to look at her and ask coldly, still not leaving? I have a few words to say to you. Mo Lian and He Shurchen turned to glance at Arbor and nodded. Let's go up first. They entered the side room. After being tormented for most of the night, the sky was already a bit bright. Arbor looked at her indifferently. What is it? At that time, I was in a hurry to go to Shuntian Prefecture, so I found a secret medicine and took it. Although my cultivation improved by leaps and bounds in a short time, my cultivation will gradually dissipate. However, with the passage of time, my cultivation will slowly disperse, and it will disperse faster and faster with each passing year. Yi Lingmin said softly. That's what you deserve. Don't expect me to save you. Arbor said bluntly. Yes, I never expected little junior sister to save me. Yi Lingmin nodded and said. I deserve it. But I'm telling little junior sister this because I want to tell you that I might not have much time left. So I want to tell you in advance about the things I've investigated over the years. Arbor was silent for a long time. He looked at her coldly and said, Speak. I have followed this Jiao Wu for a long time. After many investigations, I found out that he is the deputy commander of Gung Pingqing's private army. Yi Lingmin glanced at General Jia, who was standing silently at the side. Gung Pingqing usually keeps a very low profile. It's very difficult to investigate him. If this Jiao Wu didn't like men, I'm afraid we wouldn't have caught him so easily. Yi Lingmin continued. According to my investigation, I suspect that Gung Pingqing's private army is probably hiding under the red light district. I followed Jiao Wu several times, but in the blink of an eye, I lost him. If I were to say that the entrance is not underground, I cannot imagine how that Jiao Wu would be able to disappear before my eyes. Arbor's expression eased a little. He stretched out his hand and waved at the frozen Jiao Wu. Come here. Upon hearing this, Jia Zhong walked up like a marionette before stopping in front of Qiao Mu and the others, standing there in a daze. Gung Pingqing secretly cultivated a private army? Yes, Shuntian guards. How is their strength? 100,000 mystic cultivators. 5,000 spiritual cultivators below level 10. 500 spiritual cultivators above level 10. Yilingmin's expression changed. This number was already very large to her. It seemed that removing this faction would not be something that could be done overnight. Arbor asked expressionlessly, "Where is the base?" Chapter 2165. Where's the base? Arbor asked again expressionlessly. A hint of pain and struggle appeared on Jiao Wu's face. Perhaps he was like this out of his instinctive resistance when the core question was asked. Arbor threw another dictum talisman at him. Under the urging of the puppet talisman and dictum talisman, Jiao Wu finally calmed down and said, It's 5 li outside the apricot blossom pavilion under the bridge." After saying that, Jiao Wu was like a puppet and did not make another sound. There was a spot on his arm that was so rotten that the bone could almost be seen, so subconsciously, he was in great pain and kept furrowing his brows. "Since that's the case, little junior sister, let's not delay this matter. We've already alerted the enemy today," Emolian said calmly. "Do you think those people will still be waiting for you to go back and capture them?" Arbor nodded in agreement with Emolian's words. Most likely, the moment they came out of Spring House, the underground base on the other end had already started moving people. Moreover, the underground base outside the apricot blossom pavilion probably only had a small portion of people arranged there. To gather as many as 100,000 mystic cultivators, that a small street probably couldn't hide so many people. Arbor glanced at Yilingmin, and the latter sensibly stood up and said indifferently, "I don't believe they can run far. I'll go over there and take a look." "Stop." Arbor swept her a cold glance. "You're still as impulsive as before. You can't even handle a level 4 spiritual cultivator like Jiao Wu today, let alone other people. If you rashly go over like this, you'll just be throwing away your life for nothing." Yilingmin clenched her fists and turned to look at her. It's my duty to investigate the whereabouts of Shuntian Prefecture's main culprit. I definitely won't let them off." Arbor was indifferent. "What else do you want to investigate? Luigi is dead, and Gung Pingqing also vanished into thin air. The remaining people are merely unimportant people. I won't let any of the people who deserve to die off. Gung Pingqing is dead. The Gung Pingqing you assassinated at the banquet that night was one of my men," Arbor said coldly. Yilingmin's entire body trembled as if all her strength had been sucked out of her. She sat down on the stool with a thump and stared blankly ahead. I've been investigating for so many years, I've put in so much effort, but in the end, why don't you just move your finger and be done with it? Master is right. I'm impulsive and reckless, but I'm not smart enough. I can't compare to you." Yilingmin lowered her head and sighed dejectedly. Arbor looked at her and said coldly, "Scram before I change my mind. Don't ever appear in front of me again. I want to pay my respects to Master and Martial Uncle's memorial tablets." "You're not worthy," Arbor said coldly, rejecting her request. "Little junior sister, do you hate me?" "Yes." Arbor clenched her fists tightly, an indescribable sorrow in her heart. "Because of your competitiveness, the entire Holy Water sect was brutally massacred. Where were you when I was cleaning up the corpses of my fellow disciples? Where were you when I was digging graves for my senior sisters and Martial Uncle? Where were you when I was piling dirt for them? Where were you when I was kneeling in front of them and sobbing my heart out? Yilingmin, don't think that I'll forgive you just because you shed a few tears in front of me." Chapter 2166. Never in this lifetime. Arbor's cold gaze landed on Yilingmin's face. She turned around and said angrily, "Leave. Don't ever appear in front of me again." "I'm sorry, little junior sister. I regret it too." I regret it so much. Yiling Min's tears fell one by one. Seeing that Arbor's back was facing her and no longer speaking, Yiling Min hung her head and dragged her feet out of the door, looking back every step she took. Jojo. Emolian reached out and gently pried apart her tightly clenched fingers. He turned to look at Hu Shurchen, who had a serious expression on his face. Why are you still standing there? Get a wet cloth. Hu Shurchen rolled her eyes at him, and got up reluctantly. She took out a clean handkerchief from her pocket, washed it and brought it over. Emolian opened the little fellow's palm, and wiped off a few drops of blood for her. He sighed and said, Jojo, I wanted to teach you a lesson, but you're so cunning. How can I bear to teach you a lesson now that you're like this? Arbor sniffled and glanced at him. She said expressionlessly, What did I do wrong? Ha! Hu Shurchen chuckled and said, You didn't do anything wrong? You went to the red light district alone in the middle of the night to look for a man. Isn't that great? What man am I looking for? Arbor's expression said, You're making it up, keep making it up. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple, and all those dreams and worries? Aren't they all yours? Are you talking about the green peacock and the red chicken? Arbor frowned. That restaurant just has more people of all shapes and sizes. The tea is average, and the food isn't that good either. Restaurant. Hu Shurchen and Emolian looked at each other. Emolian held back her laughter and asked, What green peacock and red chicken? What did you see? It's so colorful. Green peacock, red chicken, yellow lantern grass, blue phoenix flowers. A bunch of messy colors. It hurts my eyes. The two men. Don't you think these people are good-looking? Yuan Shurchen's mouth twitched as she asked. Arbor shook his head. What's there to see? It was a jumble of colors. It's not even 1% as good as Duanyu. Crown Prince Mo's smiling face abruptly stiffened. Originally, he was still very pleased with himself. Sure enough, his baby automatically filtered out a group of orioles and swallows. But why the heck did Jojo always like to use Duanyu as the benchmark? For example, what does Jojo think of Yas? Jojo? I don't know him. He's not even 1/10 as good-looking as Duanyu. Duanyu, this guy was truly a lingering spirit. So hateful. Hichin blinked and suddenly laughed. What about me? What about me? Am I better looking or is that Duanyu better looking? Xiaomu glanced at him, before looking at her dear husband, who was sitting on the side and looking at her with a grin. A very strong desire to live inexplicably arose in her heart, and she hastily hugged Emolien's arm and exclaimed, My Lien is the most beautiful. Uft. Yuan Shurchen guffawed and patted the little fellow's head. Suddenly, his hand paused, and his gaze landed on her palm. Jojo, your wound? Miss Chiao looked down. Emolien's gaze also landed on her palm, which was seeping with a few drops of blood. There were now a few tiny bruises on her originally fair and tender hand. They were small wounds caused by pinching her fingertips, but they had completely disappeared by now. Her hands had returned to their original incomparably fair appearance, and not a single wound could be seen. Chapter 2167. Let me take a look. Emolien pulled her into his arms, and flipped open her little paws to examine them carefully again. He nodded and said, Your recovery ability is very strong. I can't tell that you were once injured at all. It was really quite strange. The recovery speed of this kind of injury was a little strange. Arbor looked up at the two of them, and said with a blank expression, It was like this in the past. I am my Chiao. Your little body may contain an extremely strong strange energy. It's probably the effect of the Xuanji core. To be honest, even Arbor didn't quite believe this. Before she had obtained the Xuanji core, this strange recovery ability had occurred from time to time. It was just that she had neglected it most of the time. Or perhaps, she subconsciously didn't want to think about it. The Xuanji core is just a cultivation inheritance. It shouldn't have anything to do with this self-recovery ability, Emolien said with a smile. But it's okay. This self-recovery ability is a good thing. Just don't show it in front of others in the future. Yes. It's okay if you don't know what's going on. You should know in the future if you have the chance. Chun Chun patted the little fellow's head, and got up to wave his hand as he walked out of the door. You've been tired for half the night. You're almost dog-tired. Don't wake me up when you're going to catch up on sleep. If you don't sleep well, your face will be damaged. Chun Chun leisurely walked out and said faintly. Emolian snorted and flung the door to the side room shut. He lowered his head to look at Miss Chow in his arms. Arbor glanced at him and instantly pulled his hand away. She jogged to the side of the bed and rolled onto it. She pulled the blanket over her face and covered it from head to toe. Husband, Jojo is sleepy. I'll sleep first. Emolian. That looking at her two little boots that were exposed outside the blanket, Emolian couldn't help but want to laugh. This little fellow didn't have any emotional intelligence. She was used to reading people's expressions. In order to prevent him from settling the score later, she slipped away first and pretended to be asleep. She didn't even take off her shoes. Emolian walked forward and sat by the bed. He helplessly reached out to take off her shoes. Wife. Arbor saw that he had failed to pretend to be asleep, so he peeked out from under the covers and blinked at him. Emolian bent down and looked at her with a smile. Do you still want to go to those brothels in the future? What brothel? Xiao Mu's eyes darted around. Emolian couldn't help but want to laugh. Don't pretend. Pretend to be calm. I'm guessing that once you walk in, your little face will be stunned. I don't understand what you're talking about. Arbor pulled the blanket up to cover his face expressionlessly. Emolian couldn't help but want to laugh. She raised her hand to pull down her quilt and poked her cheek. You clearly know that it's not a restaurant. It's just a small brothel. Still pretending? Arbor peeked out a pair of large eyes and looked at him carefully. She rolled over and rolled onto the bed. Hubby, I'm going to sleep. I don't understand what you're talking about at all. Emolian couldn't help but stare at the back of her head. He leaned over and blew into her ear as he whispered. Wife, next time you sneak off by yourself behind hubby's back again, you'll really be out of luck. Arbor only felt a chill at the back of her neck. How scary. To think that she had pretended to be cute and tried her best to squeeze out a cute smile for him to see. So he had seen through it all along. This man was too smart and sharp. She had almost fooled herself. Chapter 2168. Poor Qiao. Arbor was disappointed. Actually, she already knew what that red light district was the moment she walked into it, that she pulled a long face just to tell everyone. This darling doesn't know what the hell this place is. This is merely a restaurant. A strange snack bar. Nothing more. Who knew that her dear husband would see through her at a glance? Wah, poor Qiao. Her husband would see through any of her little tricks. Qiao at the time. Qiao, this spring full house seems to be a men's brothel. Why would Yi Lingmin come to this kind of place? I'll go in and take a look. Qiao, Master, I'll be killed by the great Prince Mo. Wah. Qiao at the time. How could that be? If you don't say it, I won't say it. Only you and I will know. Who would know? She had never visited a brothel in her previous life. Since she came here unexpectedly in this life, she might as well stroll around. Miss Qiao expressionlessly walked up the steps. A little miss, does your parents know that you came to our spring full house to stroll around? So long-winded. If His Excellency found out, how could she come to this men's brothel? Couldn't he tell that she was just here to stroll around? Arbor reined in her thoughts and flipped over, doing her best to squeeze out a sweet smile. Hubby, don't make a fuss. Jojo is so sleepy. Emolian's smile reached the depths of his eyes. He tilted his head and looked at her with a smile. Then sleep. Remember not to think of red, orange, yellow, green, blue and purple in your dreams, much less do on you. Think of hubby. Oh. Arbor turned her head and faced him with the back of her head. She immediately closed her eyes and sank into her conscious to chat with Qiao. Qiao, you're capable now. You'll divulge little master's whereabouts to hubby. Wah, master, Qiao is innocent. You don't know how terrifying the great crown prince and the venerable peach blossom immortal were back then. They both threatened Qiao. One wanted to roast Qiao, and the other wanted to throw Qiao into the frying pan. The most wicked thing was that they even wanted to throw Qiao into the cesspool. Qiao can't go into the cesspool. Arbor, that wicked indeed. Master, Qiao is in trouble. The crown prince had brought out his flames. How terrifying. Qiao hates lightning and fire the most. Qiao is too pitiful. Enough. Sell your ass in misery. Xiaomu directly blocked this little fellow. This stinking brat had purposely exposed her whereabouts. No matter how vicious those two men were, they wouldn't hurt Qiuqiu. Don't think that she didn't know. Initially, he thought that he wouldn't be able to fall asleep if he pretended to be asleep. Who knew that in less than 2 minutes, she lost all consciousness and fell into a deep slumber. By the time he woke up, the sky was already dark. Arbor looked out of the window blankly and rolled out of bed. What's going on? She actually slept all the way to night. The little fellow jumped off the bed. Just as he finished putting on his clothes, he heard the door of the room move. Emolian pushed the door open and walked in. Upon seeing her standing inside the room, Crown Prince Emo couldn't resist curling his lips in amusement. Qiao woke up. Arbor felt that the Crown Prince's gaze was clearly filled with mockery. Arbor raised her hand to tidy up her messy long hair. Her eyes drifted as she looked around. It's already so late. I didn't think that I would sleep the entire afternoon. Ha ha. Dao Wuji's laughter came from outside the door. My sister-in-law, you didn't sleep the entire afternoon. You slept from yesterday afternoon until tonight. She could really sleep. Chapter 2169. What? Arbor was stunned. She walked to the door and poked her head out to look at everyone outside. Everyone was looking at her with smiles on their faces. It's fine. You advanced for 7 days and didn't have a good rest. It's only right for you to have a good sleep. Emolian slowly walked out and reached out to hold her little hand with a smile. Arbor coughed lightly and nodded. She didn't forget to roll her eyes at Dao Wuji when she walked out the door. You're the only one with a glib mouth. The group went downstairs to eat. It was a very sumptuous meal. After eating and drinking to their fill, Dao Wuji suggested that they go out for a stroll to help with digestion. Since they had nothing better to do, everyone agreed. Arbor slept for a day and night, and was now full of energy. She could even walk with the wind. Emolian saw that she was walking quickly, and reached out to pull her to his side. He looked at her in amusement. Why are you running? I'm not running. Why aren't you running? Are you worried that your husband will settle the score with you? Arbor's eyes turned, and she reached out to grab his arm. Husband, did Dunjan send any news yesterday? Stiffly changing the topic. Emolian poked her forehead, and couldn't help but laugh. Dunjan didn't send any news. I also find it a little strange. Wife, are you willing to accompany your husband on a night trip to Shuntian Prefecture's main residence? Arbor's eyes lit up. There had been no news from Dunjan for 2 days. It was reasonable for the two of them to sneak into the main residence and see how he was doing. Okay. Take me there. Everlasting Blade was walking in front of the two of them, so he could hear their conversation clearly. Now that he heard that they could sneak into Shuntian Prefecture's main residence to play, how could he sit still? He quickly volunteered and praised himself. Arbor glanced at him and said with a serious expression, We're not going there to play. Lien and I are going there to do serious business. Yes. I'm also going to do something serious. Everlasting Blade pointed at his face and said with a mischievous smile, Look at my serious face. Xiaomu averted her eyes in disdain. You don't look very reliable, so I'd better not. Dao Wuji looked at Emolian with a bitter expression. Breaking into Shuntian Prefecture at night. Jojo and I alone will be enough. Emolian said indifferently. If there are too many people, it'll be easier to alert the enemy. All right. Dao Wuji lowered his head. Arbor glanced at him and snorted. My peaches have ripened again. Do you want some? Alas! Dao Wuji was about to sigh when the word peach popped up in his head. He suddenly sobered up and raised his head. Yes. Give me a truckload. Bah! Arbor spat at him. This person was really asking for an exorbitant price. Dao Wuji looked a little aggrieved. Ever since he ate 2 peaches last time, this stingy little sister-in-law had stopped giving him any more. There were so many peach trees on Paradise Planet. The heavy peaches were about to crush the branches. What do you know? Jojo wants to use them to make spiritual peach wine. The venerable peach blossom immortal rolled his eyes at Dao Wuji and waved his hand. Go to the side. Don't meddle. Spiritual peach wine. Dao Wuji chuckled. In that case, venerable immortal must have drunk it before? Hu Shurchen snorted. Of course. Then do you have any with you? No. Chapter 2170. Jichen glanced at him warily. Unfortunately, his brainless answer was almost instantaneous. Instead, it made Endless Blade certain that the venerable peach blossom immortal definitely had this spiritual peach wine. Brother Chen, you're wrong. Of course, good wine should be shared with good friends. Jichen glared at him with a look that said, Who's your brother? His expression was full of condemnation. You're already so old, yet you still want to pretend to be young and call me brother. The peony fairy couldn't help but burst into laughter. Endless Blade's mouth twitched. He threw himself at Ji Chen, wanting to hug Ji Chen's arm. Brother Chen, let's enjoy our blessings together. Good things should be shared. It's better to share than to share alone. Get lost. Ji Chen kicked him without hesitation and dodged to little Taisui's side. Endless Blade thumped his chest and stamped his feet. This spiritual peach wine must be especially delicious. Otherwise, why would you be like this? For a sip of wine, he had become friendless. This wine was becoming more and more attractive to Endless Blade. Little Taisui glanced at Endless Blade in disdain. Where's your shame? I don't want it anymore. Everyone. Why was this idiot Everlasting Blade a member of their team? Just how careless was his answer? They really felt embarrassed for Endless Blade. Xiaomu glanced at a certain person, Dao, who was incessantly making a scene, and helplessly took out a jug of wine. However, Endless Blade had his back to her, and Jichen was especially fast. In the blink of an eye, he was beside her. In the next instant, the jug in her little hand was taken away by this uncle. Jichen, what are you doing? You shameless bastard. How dare you steal my wine? Is this wine really that good? The peony fairy's curiosity was piqued. Luoda sniffed hard and praised, It's really good wine. The wine hadn't been opened yet, but they could already smell the faint fragrance of peach blossoms, accompanied by the rich fragrance of wine. Just smelling it made them feel refreshed. It really is good wine. Thin Monk, a man of few words, couldn't help but look up at the wine jug in Ji Chen's hand. Thin Tichuo's image was a bit strange. Half of this fellow's hair was bald, and the other half was loose like a clump of withered grass. His entire face was sallow, and he didn't like to talk much. Most of the time, he sat there silently, listening to the conversations of others. A wine that could make him open his mouth was obviously a top-notch wine. Limitless Blade wanted to take back his wine even more. He grabbed Yuan Shurchen's arm and persistently shouted, Yuan Shurchen, hurry up and give me back my wine. Arbor couldn't stand it anymore. Alright, everyone has one. Everlasting Blade hurriedly left Shurchen behind and jogged over to Arbor. He beamed with joy and said, Jojo, let me try it first. Emolian glanced at him and scolded him in her heart. What a glutton! Arbor handed Limitless Blade a pot and distributed the rest of the wine to everyone. Finally, he glanced at Sheng Chen, who was looking at him expectantly. You brewed so many pots in the first batch. Miss Chiao glared at him angrily. Most of the peach blossom wine had been stolen by this guy, Yuan Shurchen. The remaining small portion had been distributed to everyone today. She only had 2 pots left. 2 pots. The winemaker had no wine to drink. How infuriating. Yuan Shurchen glanced at her listlessly. My Jojo. Chapter 2171. Arbor's mouth twitched. He threw the last jug of wine to him and shouted, Scram. Hu Shurchen giggled, took the peach blossom wine, and hurriedly moved to the side. Prince Mo's face darkened as he looked Hu Shurchen up and down. This damned Hu Shurchen. She had already seen through Jojo's easily softened temperament. His wife was too popular, how could he get angry? Dao Wuji had already pulled out the cork of the wine jug. After taking a sip, his eyes suddenly lit up. Little sister-in-law, you actually hid such good wine for so long. She should have taken it out and shared it earlier. Dao Wuji beat his chest and stamped his feet. Strange. Why did he feel warm all over when the wine entered his stomach, and a subtle stream of saint power slowly flowed in his body? Hu Shurchen glanced at Dao Wuji with a smug look. How is it? Do you feel it? This spiritual wine can stimulate the flow of saint power in the body. Are you surprised? Are you pleasantly surprised? Seeing Hu Shurchen's smug expression, everyone couldn't help but grit their teeth. No wonder this kid secretly stole most of the peach blossom wine. It turned out that it could subtly stimulate the flow of saint power in the body. If they took it in the long run, it would probably be beneficial to their cultivation level. For people like them who had already entered the spiritual venerable realm, and were in the immortal venerable realm, it was as difficult as ascending to heaven to raise their cultivation level by a small level. Now that they had taken a few sips of the peach blossom wine, it was beneficial to them. How could they not be surprised? I really like this little girl more and more. She's clever and clever, oh ha 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 ha. I only hate that I wasn't born a man. Fairy Ginkgo's giggles attracted Prince Mo's cautious gaze. He suppressed it with a series of contemptuous looks. Fairy Ginkgo pursed her lips and stopped talking. As they were talking, Tong quickly came to Emolien with several hidden guards. Bowing, Tong quickly walked forward and said to Emolien in a low voice, "Your Highness, Madame Feng has made a move. Just now, she took dozens of people to the hillside outside the city." "How is the Shentian Prefecture's prefecture lord?" Arbor quickly asked. When Madame Feng left, this subordinate searched the entire main residence, but did not find Manor Lord Gung. Could something have happened to that chatterbox Dun Zhuang? Arbor thought in astonishment. Emolien's gaze landed on Arbor. "Jojo, do you want to go over and take a look?" "All right." Arbor nodded. "Since that's the case, let's go together." Fairy Ginkgo put away the smile on her face and said seriously, "Things might have changed." Little Taisui and the others nodded in agreement. Dunzong is not an irresponsible person. Since he promised Jojo to stay in Shentian Prefecture to be a good spy, it is impossible for him to disappear without any news. I'm guessing that Lady Feng must have seen through Dunju's identity. Arbor frowned. "There's no time to lose. Let's set off immediately. Tong, lead the way." "Yes." Tong immediately bowed. Turning around, he led several hidden guards and rushed out of the city. Everyone used their chi to fly. Their speed was not inferior to some ordinary flying mystic beasts. "Xiao Xiao, you broke through to level 7 spiritual cultivator here last time." Emolien pointed at the mountain forest below them. At that time, it alarmed the entire Shentian Prefecture. People from all walks of life came to investigate. Arbor silently pointed at the sunken ground below. "What happened there?" "So sleepy. I woke up to catch up." Chapter 2172. Emolien glanced at her in amusement. Then, holding her hand, the two of them landed on the square plateau. Apart from the rather high ground they were standing on, the surrounding terrain had sunk nearly half a meter. "Here, you were sitting right here at the time." Emolien couldn't help but comment. "Even hubby is scared of your advancement. The result of all the spiritual aura gushing toward you is that the surroundings can't bear the burden. Other than the square inch you're sitting on, the ground within a radius of 1,000 feet has sunk because of you." Arbor expressionlessly turned her head away. Emolien was amused and pulled her small body back. Hubby saw it with his own eyes. Don't try to deny it. A perfectly fine mountain forest was turned into this by a little vandal like you. Little Taisui and the others also followed them to the sunken terrain. After studying it for a moment, they all turned to look at the expressionless Arbor. Arbor turned her head with a swish and asked Tong, who was standing nearby, "Have we arrived?" Reporting to the Crown Princess, Madame Neifeng's destination is still some distance ahead. Arbor waved her hand with a taut expression. "Lead the way." Everyone couldn't resist snickering. The little stoic was too amusing. Every time they talked about a topic she didn't want to talk about, her small face would be especially taut. Tong hastily turned around to lead the way, leading everyone into the depths of the mountain forest. The deeper they went into the mountain forest, the more lush the trees became. Everyone gave up on flying and walked up the mountain on foot for about half an hour. From afar, they could see that the terrain had opened up slightly. After walking for another half an hour, Tong led everyone to a cliff entrance. He pointed below and said, "Madame Neifeng let her people down from here." Everyone looked at each other in bewilderment. Arbor waved the fog in front of her and said aloofly, "The fog below is poisonous." Little Taisui and the others hastily retreated a few steps. Arbor took out several handmade antidote pills with special effects from her inner world and distributed them to everyone. It looks like there are many poisonous insects and ants below. Be careful. Ordinary poisons were basically useless against them. Even so, Arbor still reminded them to be careful and not fail miserably. Let's go down and take a look. Arbor and Emolian glanced at each other. Both of them raised their chi and flew down the cliff. Little Taisui and the others also followed behind. They controlled their speed and slowly made their way to the bottom of the cliff. He was surrounded by a thick layer of white fog, from which tiny water droplets constantly seeped out. However, since everyone had activated their defensive barriers, these small corrosive water droplets could not get close to them at all. The distance from the cliff to the bottom of the cliff was actually not too high. After everyone slowly swayed down, their eyes couldn't help but turn solemn. In front of them, there were countless palm-sized scorpions crawling back and forth. As if they had sensed the invasion of strangers, the black and red scorpions suddenly turned their heads and crawled toward their feet with rustling sounds. Arbor stood in front of everyone with a calm expression. He took out a small porcelain bottle from his inner world and poured out a lot of white powder. With a few sizzling sounds, all the poisonous scorpions that stepped on the white powder turned into black pus. It was a very shocking sight. They died without a complete corpse. Seeing how powerful the poison was, everyone couldn't help but jump in fright. This is a poison powder specially used to deal with poisonous creatures. Catching up on yesterday. Chapter 2173. Waiting at ease for an exhausted enemy was effortless. Arbor poured the white powder on the ground and drew a circle around everyone. The more poisonous the creature, the faster it will die after stepping on this powder. Arbor looked indifferently at the pitiful poisonous creatures that turned into black puddles after stepping on that white circle and surging toward them like a tide. Arbor wasn't idle either. She calmly took out several empty gourds from her inner world and collected the scorpion's poisonous blood on the ground. Everyone. They suddenly pitied these scorpions. What were they going to do? Leaving aside the fact that there were no corpses left, the little girl had to ruthlessly collect the remaining bit of blood essence. They didn't know who she would harm next time. The little girl was too savage. Arbor unhurriedly collected the scorpion's poisonous blood for about half a quarter of an hour. Everyone's eyes swept around, and they couldn't help but laugh out loud. Those slow-witted poisonous scorpions finally reacted. However, at this very moment, about 2/3 of their brothers and sisters were already dead. How would the several thousand poisonous scorpions dare to approach the remaining 1/3? They cowered and crawled backward with their heads tucked in. After a series of rustling sounds, the scorpions withdrew back into the sand and disappeared without a trace. Fairy Ginkgo had long been disgusted beyond words. Rubbing the small goosebumps on her arms, Fairy Ginkgo shuddered and asked, "These disgusting things, will they emerge from the sand again?" Although she was very clear in her heart that the scorpions would not be able to cross the white line that Jojo had drawn, she still felt extremely disgusted. She covered her body with 2 layers of defensive barriers, afraid that those ugly little things would come into contact with her delicate skin. "Don't worry," Arbor shook her head and said, "They've already run far away. Let's go." Emolian grasped the little fellow's small hand and pulled her forward. This valley didn't seem too big from the entrance, but the deeper they went, the deeper they felt. On both sides were cramped and towering cliffs, and a slender passageway led into the depths of the dense fog. The Ginkgo fairy and the Peony fairy quickly followed behind the little stoic. Both of them nervously wore defensive shields, and they rubbed their arms from time to time. Arbor shouted "Stop!" from time to time. Then he walked to the side of the mountain and collected some moss, vines, small flowers, and all kinds of strange things. Sometimes, when she saw a half-lying, motionless lizard, she would use her silver needles to kill it. Then, she would walk over expressionlessly, pick up the lizard, and bottle it. Everyone was speechless. Why did they feel that Xiao Qiao didn't seem to be taking a stroll in a dangerous poison garden? Instead, it was as if they had entered her amusement park. In her eyes, there were top-notch materials for making poison everywhere. "Stop!" Everyone's eyes twitched involuntarily. Sure enough, The little guy walked a few steps forward, squatted down, and fiddled with the soil. He pulled out a small twisting blue snake from the soil, and glared at it threateningly. "Don't move." The little white snake, originally coiled around her wrist, also raised its round head, and glared at the little blue snake to intimidate it. The little blue snake was scared silly. They didn't know if it was frightened by the little fellow, or by the big boss on the little fellow's wrist. Its snake body hung down stiffly like a dead fish, stiff and motionless. Chapter 2174. Emolien, and the rest looked at the snake sympathetically. The little fellow was quick to react and ruthless. She pried open the snake's mouth, and gave it a warning glare. "Don't move, don't move." Everyone. In the blink of an eye, Miss Chow forcefully pulled out the 2 venomous fangs from the snake's mouth. It hurt so much. Everyone looked at the snake's contorted expression, and sincerely shed tears of sympathy for it. Xiao Mu tossed away that blue snakelet. The little snake whimpered and wriggled its body, trying to escape. Arbor stepped on its tail. Everyone. Little fellow, you're too much. Arbor put the 2 venomous fangs into a small crystal bottle. After putting away the bottle, he squatted down and lifted the snake up. The snake was helpless. Its head tilted up slightly, and its eyes were filled with pitiful tears. "It's crying!" Fairy Ginkgo exclaimed as if she had discovered a new continent. How could it not cry? Everyone looked at the cowardly little blue snake with great sympathy. "What are you crying for?" The little fellow slapped the snake's head and pried open its mouth again, sprinkling 2 drops of medicinal liquid into it. "It'll grow back in a month." "What a stupid snake crying. Your 2 venomous fangs aren't growing well. Otherwise, how could they be pulled out so easily? Now that I've removed them before they're completely crooked, the ones that grow back in the future will be much sturdier than this." "Pig." Arbor scolded the little snake to himself, and threw it into the soil. Scram. The little blue snake, who had its fangs pulled out and was scolded as a pig, felt that it had never felt so wronged in its life. So wronged. It wriggled its slender little tail, and was about to hurriedly burrow back into the soil, when it suddenly saw Arbor take out a bottle of medicinal liquid from his sleeve, and feed it to the big white snake on his wrist. What a sweet smell! The little blue snake paused and suddenly slithered towards Xiao Mu's feet with a rustle. Everyone thought, "You're courting death." The little blue snake slithered to Arbor's feet, and suddenly collapsed on the ground, in a very human-like manner. Then its belly flipped, and it actually rolled towards the sky like a fish. It stuck out its belly, and had a "please feed me" expression on its face. Everyone was speechless. Arbor glanced at it and said expressionlessly, "You can eat it if you want. In the future, I will offer a drop of venom essence every 3 months." The corner of Ma Shurchen's mouth twitched as she stole a glance at Emolien, who was standing beside her. He dared to bet his head with Emolien that the little fellow was definitely doing this on purpose. This little blue snake was definitely not an ordinary creature. Unfortunately, he was caught by Qiao Qiao today, even though he had been living in this poison valley for so many years. This is a blue spirit snake emperor. Arbor picked up the little blue snake, who was willing to sell himself because of his gluttony, and expressionlessly threw him back to the 100 Poison Valley on Paradise Planet. Although it is only a little snake at the peak of spiritual beast level, its venom is the most poisonous in the world. A drop of poison essence every 3 months was more than enough for her. The blue spirit snake emperor's venom was very malleable, and could be made into all kinds of poisons. In the future, this venom would be very effective against great spiritual masters above level 10. Arbor turned around and looked at everyone. "What's with your expressions?" "And nothing." Fairy Ginkgo mumbled and closed her mouth. She secretly thought that the little blue snake was a little pitiful. Chapter 2175. Look, even after selling herself, she's still happily counting money for her master. Arbor glanced at them. Although no one said anything, their eyes were full of drama. Humph. Miss Qiao turned her head, and continued walking forward. Everyone followed the thin and long path filled with thick fog. After walking for about half an hour, they saw a bright light in front of them. A row of bamboo houses was hidden in the fog. Looking at it, It was as if they were in a fairyland, the fog lingering around. Arbor blinked and looked up at Emolien. Don't you feel that the way in has been very smooth? Emolien nodded. It's fine. Since the other party opened the door and let us in. Let's see how capable this Madame Feng is. Arbor was naturally not afraid. Since Madame Feng dared to capture Dunzong, she had to be prepared to be uprooted. Moreover, she was also somewhat curious about Madame Feng's background. What kind of status did she have in the Tianyun organization? Hallmaster? Or even higher? Arbor glanced over indifferently. He took out 2 small medicine bottles from his inner world and handed them to the Ginkgo fairy and the peony fairy. Apply this on your exposed skin. I guarantee that no poisonous insects will dare to approach you. Weren't they tired of keeping the defensive barrier open all day long? Keeping the barrier open also consumed spiritual energy. Oh no, they were consuming sacred energy, okay. The 2 hurriedly took the medicine and removed the barrier after applying it. They looked around and saw that no poisonous creatures dared to approach them. Only then did they relax. Everyone walked towards the entrance of the bamboo house. At the same time, Dunzong, who was tied to an interrogation pillar, was cursing at Madame Feng. Stop dreaming. A warrior prefers death to humiliation. I won't tell you who I am even if I die. It was really like a tiger being bullied by dogs. To think that he, a dignified venerable realm cultivator, was forced to be suppressed in Gung Pengcheng's small spirit realm body. Woo. He wanted to regain his previous cultivation and had to continue cultivating. The problem was that he needed time to train. Although he was already training as hard as he could, Gung Pengcheng's body was limited. The more he thought about it, the more pitiful he felt. He wanted to cry. Madame Feng's face darkened as she stood in front of Dunju. Seeing that he was about to cry again, she couldn't help but raise her hand and slap his face. Shut up. You fierce woman. Bring me a whip. Wow. Don't hit me, don't hit me. Ah. The moment the whip came down, the stalks let out a heart-wrenching cry and a heart-rending scream. Shut up. Madame Feng scolded angrily. Her face was slightly distorted. At this moment, the door of Nethery's room was pushed open. A woman who looked like a maid hurried over with her head lowered. She whispered to Madame Feng, Madam, Hall Master Gong is here. Madame Feng frowned slightly. She handed the whip in her hand to the maidservant and said, Continue. Yes. She turned around and walked out. Miserable screams rose again. As the door of Nethery's room slammed shut, Madame Feng raised her hand and rubbed the space between her eyebrows. Everything had been going wrong recently. After her stubborn disciple, Huang He, discovered her biggest secret, she wanted to get rid of Huang He but failed. What happened next was even more dramatic. She actually discovered that her husband seemed to have been replaced by someone else. This Gung Pengcheng, in front of her, was completely different from her husband in terms of temperament and behavior. Chapter 2176. Although he usually covered it up very well, and could clearly describe many of the past events between them, he naturally couldn't match the small details. 2 days ago, Madame Feng was completely certain that the Gung Pengcheng in front of her had definitely been swapped. However, that person's skills were very good. The appearance did not change, but the heart was different. In other words, the original Gung Pengcheng's soul had probably dissipated long ago, and his spiritual consciousness had been destroyed. Although this man had never loved her from the beginning to the end, they had been husband and wife for so many years. It would be a lie to say that she did not regret it. If it were not for Gung Pengcheng, she would not have joined the organization and undergone such a drastic change. From a cripple in the past, she had become a person with special abilities. Her life had completely changed. Although Gung Pengcheng usually treated her with respect, as a husband, he had performed quite well. When they were outside, he gave her enough face as his wife. In the manner, he also never allowed those concubines to suppress her. After decades of being together, he left just like that. It would be a lie to say that she did not regret it. After old Gung left, Madame Feng felt as if a knife had been twisted in her heart for the past few days, that it turned out that there were many things that she did not know when she was together. Only when she lost him would she know that the other party was not that unimportant to her. It did not matter that her husband did not love her. At least he was still with her. But now there was nothing left. Madame Fong clenched her fists tightly and quickly walked into the hall. The hall was very dark and secluded. On the four walls, there were wooden decorations such as ox-headed and horse-faced malicious ghosts hanging. Each of them was described as terrifying. A tall and slightly thin young man was standing in the hall with his back facing her. He slowly turned his head. His face was covered with a ghost mask, and his scarlet ghost eyes were staring at her. Madame Feng's heart skipped a beat. She quickly bowed and respectfully called out, "Hall Master Gong." A low and hoarse roar came from behind Hall Master Gong. A figure suddenly appeared beside her like lightning and reached out to grab her neck. Madame Fong was shocked. She only felt that the hand that grabbed her seemed to be very strong. She forced herself to raise her neck and look at the person who came. She saw a woman with a slightly ashen face and veins on her face. She was bared her teeth and glared at her fiercely. That face was not the face of a normal human. The woman's hair had been shaved clean, and her bald head was covered with ferocious veins. A left hand was gripping her neck, and the strength was so great that she couldn't move at all. "Chief Gong," Madame Fong said with difficulty. "Ali," the man called out faintly. The bald woman named Ali suddenly threw Madame Fong away. Madame Fong was sent flying back more than a meter before falling heavily to the ground. She lay on the ground and gasped for air. Hiding the fear in her eyes, she raised her head with difficulty and glanced at Hall Master Gong. She quickly lowered her head and said respectfully, "Hall Master, please spare my life. Hall Master, please spare my life." "Fong Lan." Hall Master Gong looked at her coldly and said, "Do you know where you went wrong?" Madame Fong lowered her head and didn't even dare to breathe loudly. "You've greatly disappointed the Lord." Hall Master Gong sneered. "Your impatience has ruined the Lord's plans. Now that those people have found their way here, what are you going to do?" A cold and bloody smile appeared on Fong Lan's face. Chapter 2177. Kill them and make sure they don't return. With just you. Humiliation flashed through Fong Lan's eyes. She raised her head and said with a twisted expression, "Of course, it's not just me. There are also the 100,000 mystic cultivators under my command." "Your subordinates?" Yes, master subordinates. Master didn't have you nurture these people for you to squander as you wish. Fong Lan silently lowered her head. Everyone thought that Gung Pengcheng had a very powerful private army under his command, but they didn't know that this private army was actually collected and nurtured by her master. They directly obeyed her master, but she had the authority to mobilize them. Now but Hall Master Gong said she couldn't abuse this authority to mobilize troops. Fong Lan was naturally unconvinced. If she didn't mobilize these troops, how could she deal with those people from Arbor? How could she avenge her husband? At this moment, she didn't know that Gung Pengcheng's original body had died in Arbor's hands. She only vaguely felt that this matter probably had something to do with that stoic-faced little girl. But now Hall Master Gong actually issued such an order? "Fong Lan, it's best if you don't act on your own," Hall Master Gong said to her coldly. "Hand over the transfer order for the Shuntian guards." Madame Neifeng silently clenched her fists. Unexpectedly, she heard an inhuman roar coming from behind Hall Master Gong. Madame Neifeng's heart tightened. She looked up at the bald woman standing a few steps behind Hall Master Gong, her palms sweating. This woman's strange appearance made her wonder who she was. Madame Neifeng broke out in cold sweat and thought, "She doesn't look human, but her appearance is infinitely close to a human's. Could it be? Madame Neifeng's eyes almost completely lit up. "Hall Master, could it be? It's a perfect zombie." Puffed. Hall Master Gong sneered coldly. "Do you think her appearance is perfect? This was far from a perfect zombie, okay? Her evolution failed. She's now a rank 1 special grade zombie." Hall Master Gong swept a glance at the bald woman and said coldly, "She can't even advance to rank 2. Such good resources spent on her have been wasted." The bald woman lowered her head in defeat. This greatly surprised Madame Fong. She hurriedly said, "Hall Master, has she completely awakened her spiritual intelligence?" "Of course," Hall Master Gong said coldly. "This rank 1 special zombie puppet possessed the memories of its human predecessor. Not only had she fully awakened her intelligence, she was basically no different from a human. However, Hall Master Gong frowned as he looked at the bald woman's appearance. He shook his head and said, "A failed product is ultimately a failed product." If he advanced to the second stage, the veins on his skin should recede, and his appearance would be no different from that of an ordinary person. But now, the bald woman would definitely give people the impression that she was not one of them at first glance. Unfortunately, he was only one small step away. Hall Master Gong sighed and gestured for the bald woman to take a few steps back. He walked over to Madame Feng, raised his hand, and said coldly, "Hand it over." The transfer order of the Shuntian Sentinels was a private army that she had painstakingly cultivated for so many years. Madame Feng gritted her teeth and took out a transfer order from her inner world with trembling hands. She bowed and handed it to Hall Master Gong. "Hall Master," Madame Feng called out submissively, "I will bring these people away." Hall Master Gong swept a glance at Madame Feng. Chapter 2178. I'll give you one last piece of advice. There are some enmity that you can't avenge. You can still survive if you leave as soon as possible. Now isn't the best time to clash head-on with Arbor's group. His lord has ordered not to clash head-on with them. Why? Feng Lan raised her head and questioned loudly. She could sense that Hall Master Gong's aura had also sunk slightly, as if he was very unhappy. Feng Lan, pay attention to your status. Weigh clearly what you should and shouldn't ask. Hall Master Gong coldly glanced at her and turned to leave with a flick of his sleeve. Suddenly, a female attendant hurriedly ran in and hastily saluted Hall Master Gong and Feng Lan. "Madam, it's bad. That Miss Chiao has led a group of people into our valley. Now that they've entered the bamboo hut and discovered that there was no one there, they're looting our supplies." Feng Lan clenched her fists and glared at Hall Master Gong, who was watching coldly from the sidelines. "Hall Master, that girl is so arrogant and despotic. Why do we have to tolerate her so much? This is an order from above. Just do as you're told." Hall Master Gong turned around and walked 3 steps before coldly glancing at the bald woman beside him. "Ollie, why aren't you leaving?" That bald woman called Ollie was like a mechanical puppet. She desperately wanted to turn around and leave with the Hall Master, but her body seemed to be out of her control and didn't move at all. Hall Master Gong sneered. "A defective product is a defective product. You can't control your body again? Take her away." The 2 subordinates following behind him immediately walked forward and lifted Ollie from both sides. They directly carried her away, as if she was a clay sculpture. This was completely the posture of moving goods. The bald woman was already sane, so this posture caused a great sense of shame to rise in her heart. "Hall Master Gong." Feng Lan couldn't resist raising her voice and called out to the Hall Master wearing a ghost mask. "Don't tell me we're abandoning this base? What else?" Hall Master Gong coldly glanced at Feng Lan. "If you didn't act rashly and alert the enemy in your eagerness for instant success and startle that girl, would we have completely retreated now?" Feng Lan couldn't resist grinding her teeth. "I don't understand. With his lord's power, couldn't he just kill that little stoic? She's just a little girl from the lower star region. Could it be that Arbor has some unknown identity?" Hall Master Gong coldly glanced at Feng Lan. "Don't act on your own. I'm warning you for the last time now." "Yes, of course. How pretentious. Lord Zhang," Hall Master Gong said coldly. When Hall Master Gong finished speaking and turned around, he suddenly heard a violent roar from the side. His expression changed and he turned his head away. Suddenly, the bald woman seemed to have gone mad. She actually dashed towards the female attendant. "Ah!" The female attendant let out a cry of alarm. She was suddenly knocked backwards by her and fell to the ground with a bang. Hall Master Gong angrily shouted, "Ali!" However, the bald woman didn't listen to his command at all. She roared and ran outside. Feng Lan was startled for a moment, then her face lit up with joy. This special-grade corpse puppet had already developed intelligence, and it even had the memories of a human when it was alive. She went crazy when she heard Arbor's name. So it looked like she definitely had an irreconcilable grudge with this little stoic. Roar, roar, roar. The bald female corpse puppet called Ollie grimaced in pain and dashed out madly without a care. It was too late for Hall Master Gong to send people to intercept her. Chapter 2179. Damn it! Hall Master Gong shouts angrily and turns his head to look at the two subordinates who were carrying the bald woman. Are you all dead? Why aren't you going to stop her? The two subordinates complain incessantly in their hearts. This rank 1 special class zombie has boundless strength and incomparably fast speed. It really isn't something that two little spirit masters can deal with. They don't know what's wrong with this fellow. It suddenly goes crazy and makes people unable to guard against it. Although they are constantly cursing in their hearts, the two of them don't dare to say anything. Since it's the Hall Master's order, they quickly follow and prepare to stop the bald woman. However, when they rush out, they can't find any trace of the bald woman. That bald woman's speed is much faster than theirs. In the time it takes to say a few words, she has already flown off to God knows where. Meanwhile, Xiao Mu and the others had ransacked that row of bamboo houses from top to bottom, inside and out. With the mentality of not wasting anything that can be used, everyone puts everything they see into their inner worlds. The Peony Fairy even says in a deadpan manner, I didn't expect that our trip to this small valley would actually have some gains. This is really unexpected. There are a lot of spirit stones piled up in this bamboo house. He-chun and the others don't need them, so Arbor takes them all. In the end, looking at some sturdy wooden tables and chairs in the bamboo house, Arbor thinks that when there are more people in the future, he will build his own small house on Paradise Planet. His family will also need these things, so he puts them all in one go. Everyone looks at her, as if they are looking at a god. Wherever this little fellow passed by, not a single strand of hair was left behind. After sweeping through this row of bamboo houses, everyone has some gains. For example, Ginkgo Fairy and the others took a batch of pretty good medicinal pills. Arbor doesn't really need these medicinal pills and the like. If she wants them, she can just refine them herself. Another example is that some of the spirit tools stored in the bamboo house were taken away by Dao Wuji. This brat plans to listen to little sister-in-law's words. In the future, when he fights, he won't waste his strength if he can get spirit tools to explode. When everyone comes out of the bamboo house, they all have a lot of gains. Just as they are about to continue walking inside, they suddenly hear a low and hoarse roar. Roar, roar, roar. Xiaomu abruptly turned her head, and the first thing she saw was a large bald head with countless veins protruding from it. So ugly. Xiaomu creased her brows and decisively swept her palm across. The with spiritual energy that he pushed out endlessly pressed forward and heavily struck the bald woman's face that was pouncing towards him. Pung! The bald woman dodged as fast as lightning. Arbor's attack missed and smashed into the ground behind the bald woman. The broken gravel immediately splashed out, and some dust flew in front of their eyes. Everyone subconsciously narrowed their eyes. Roar! Roar! The bald woman stared straight at Arbor. Her purplish-red lips wriggled, and she shouted hoarsely and strenuously, Joe! Would! Her voice was very strange. It sounded like a human, but it wasn't. It took her a lot of effort to say the two simple words Arbor. Arbor looked at her coldly and sized her up. He frowned and said, Corpse puppet? What? Dao Wuji looked over in shock. When he saw her just now, he thought that this bald woman was just a little ugly. He didn't expect that Jojo would call her a corpse puppet. Broken dreams. Chapter 2180. Emolian also furrowed her brows. It did appear to be a zombie, and it was a zombie in a complete human form. Her appearance was not good-looking, and her expression was slightly stiff. But compared to those crooked and rotting zombies in the past, this one was clearly very outstanding. However, why did this human-shaped zombie suddenly dash out from behind the bamboo house and attack Jojo without any explanation? She seemed to know Jojo and even called out her name, but it was clear that the husband and wife did not know who this bald woman was. The Peony Fairy blocked the attack and turned back to shout, Hey Jojo, this zombie seems to be coming for you. Arbor nodded. She could naturally tell that this human-shaped zombie had clearly called out her name just now. Moreover, The hatred in this bald woman's eyes was very bone-piercing. The bald woman hated her? But she had no recollection of it at all. She did not even know when she had interacted with this bald woman. Roar, roar. The bald woman clenched her fists tightly. Her finger bones appeared very thick, and her hands were 2 to 3 times larger than normal women's hands. Upon closer inspection, one would discover that her hands were covered in a thick layer of calluses that were many times thicker than other people's hands. Although her body no longer rotted after the mutation, she was still so ugly. Jojo! Moo! The bald woman shouted menacingly and abruptly dashed toward Arbor. She swung out her arms, which abruptly turned into slender noodles, and slapped at Arbor's head. Seeing this, Emolien promptly threw out a purple flame and hugged Arbor to the side. Wife, don't be scared, don't be scared. Emolien calmly rubbed the little fellow's chest. Hubby is here. Arbor? Question mark. Jojo was not scared at all, okay? Hubby was taking advantage of her, right? Ciao. Moo. The bald woman's resentful voice rang out again, and her scarlet eyes stared fixedly at Arbor and Emolien. Kill. Kill. You. The bald woman spat out these 3 words with great effort. Her 2 long arms swung in the air and attacked in the direction of Arbor again. Squawk. The bald woman let out an extremely unpleasant roar, and 2 short black wings suddenly sprouted from her back. Squawk, squawk. The bald woman flew into the air and looked down at the ground fiercely. She flapped her short wings and swooped down from a height of 100 meters. She looked like she was going to throw Arbor to the ground and tear it apart. I wonder what level this corpse puppet is. The peony fairy said with a strange expression. It seems that it has evolved to a certain extent. Compared to the little monsters we saw before, this zombie can fly and mutate parts of its body. She doesn't seem like a high-level zombie. While everyone was discussing, the purple flames in Emolien's hands had already built a high defensive wall of fire in front of the 2 of them. When the bald woman swooped down, she crashed into the flames. Immediately, she screamed in pain and subconsciously retreated. Kill them. Don't leave a single one alive. Madame Nafong rushed forward with several hundred personal guards and bellowed while pointing at Arbor and the others. Several hundred spiritual cultivators rushed forward, but before they could get close to Arbor and Emolien, they were stopped by little Taisui and the others. Chapter 2181. What? You want to win with numbers? Dao Wuji chuckled and summoned his large saber from his consciousness. He slung it over his shoulder. Come, come, come. Grandpa will play with you. A spirit master around 40 years old coldly glanced at Dao Wuji. He stomped on the ground and shot toward Dao Wuji. Originally, Xiao Chen thought that he would be able to send Dao Wuji flying with this punch. But unexpectedly he was bounced back in the same way he had charged over. His speed was twice as fast as before. His entire body tumbled as he was struck by Dao Wuji's punch. His mouth and nose were bleeding, and he howled as he was sent flying. Hundreds of spirit masters' expressions darkened. They looked at Dao Wuji as if they were facing a great enemy. They knew that brother's cultivation very well. He was a rank 7 spirit master, but he couldn't even last one move against this pretty boy. Go! A spirit master clenched his teeth. He waved his hand and everyone rushed forward to attack little Taisui and the others. A few of them even looked around and set their sights on Arbor, who was idly watching from the side. Arbor was standing behind Emolien's defensive wall of fire. He coldly watched the bald woman swoop back and forth in the air, trying to break through Emolien's defensive wall of fire. Unexpectedly, the sound of wind whistling could be heard in his ears. Emolien didn't even turn her head. Several black lotus seals flew out with a flick of her finger. She didn't even look at them and directly shot toward the sneak attackers. As soon as the black lotus seal came into contact with the skin of the sneak attackers, it immediately burst open, and a thick layer of black fog instantly swallowed the attackers. Faint cries of struggle came from the depths of the black fog. In the blink of an eye, those people had already transformed into ashes and completely vanished into thin air. The group of spirit masters who turned around to look at them couldn't help but shudder violently when they saw this. Their eyes were slightly frightened as they looked at the ruthless young man. These people looked so young. Unexpectedly, their cultivations were much higher than theirs. At this moment, these spirit masters couldn't help but feel some regret in their hearts. If Madame Feng had not promised them great benefits, how could they have disobeyed Hall Master Gong's orders and recklessly followed Madame Feng's orders? At the same time, the man wearing the devil mask was coldly looking at a maid, who was kneeling on the ground and trembling slightly. You said that Madame Feng led more than 500 people over? The maid nodded vigorously. Hall Master, Madam didn't do it on purpose. Not on purpose. Hall Master Gong sneered. She went against her master's orders and made a decision on her own. I think she must have been used to living like a princess for so many years that she forgot her true identity. She was just a dog that the master had taken in. She was so disobedient, and even wanted to betray the master. This ambitious woman, as the master had said, could not be kept. Hall Master, what about Ali? Although our people have rushed over, Ali's strength and speed are extraordinary. We may not be able to suppress her. Hall Master Gong coldly looked outside the hall. He could occasionally hear the sounds of fighting and killing coming from outside. Let's go. The subordinate's expression suddenly froze. Let's go. Could it be that Hall Master Gong wanted to give up on the special class corpse puppet? However, it wasn't just a matter of time for a special class corpse puppet to take shape. Chapter 2182. This still required the investment of a large amount of manpower and resources. How could he give up on such a meticulous nurturing just like that? Hall Master Gong was truly generous. It's just a disobedient pet, Hall Master Gong said coldly and waved his hand. In any case, it's just trash. It doesn't matter. Since that's the case, Hall Master, should we evacuate the Shuntian guards now? Hall Master Gong nodded. Go ahead. You take them away first. I'll. Hall Master, it's bad, it's bad. When Hall Master Gong heard the voice, his brows involuntarily creased. He looked up coldly at the slightly plump middle-aged man who barged in. Wu Ming, how many times have I told you? Don't be so alarmed when something happens. Sorry, Hall Master. The plump middle-aged man swayed his body and giggled foolishly. What happened? Hall Master Gong asked coldly. Hall Master. The corpse poison in the Shuntian guards suddenly flared up and bit everyone they saw. Now, the number of people affected has spread to more than 10,000. Although the fat man had a silly look on his face, his words were like beans pouring out of a bamboo tube. He spoke very quickly, and in a very organized manner. Therefore, Hall Master Gong's face turned green when he heard this person's report. Feng Lan, you're indeed gutsy, feigning compliance on the surface but opposing on the inside. Hall Master Gong gnashed his teeth and sneered. He raised his hand and said angrily, What are you still standing there for? Quickly evacuate the unharmed members of the Shuntian guards. Hall Master, this matter is still rather difficult, Wu Ming hurriedly said. Although our people went over to control it, the corpse poison acted up very quickly. Once bitten, the person will immediately turn into a corpse within a quarter of an hour. Hall Master Gong clenched his fists tightly. It should be the corpse poison of the special grade zombie we left behind. They were originally only used for small-scale experiments, but they didn't expect the deranged Feng Lan to throw them into the Shuntian guards. Could it be that the Shuntian guards, which had 100,000 mystic cultivators and 1,000 spiritual cultivators, would be completely assimilated into a chaotic zombie army? That damned Feng Lan. She didn't hesitate to do this for her own selfish desires. It was him who underestimated a woman's hatred. Branch Master Gong tightened the obsidian bracelet on his wrist and subconsciously moved the round black stone. Damn it. Hall Master, should we go out and take a look? Hall Master Gong shook his head. If we go and see Feng Lan now, she will only be more pleased with herself. Quickly bring some people over, and bring out those Shuntian guards, who have not yet been infected. Hall Master, what if we make a mistake, and bring out those infected with corpse poison, and mix them into the normal group? What should we do then? Hall Master Gong's head was about to explode. At this moment, he felt like his head was about to explode. When he heard his subordinates say such words, he couldn't help but be angry. Then open your eyes and take a good look before you speak. After he finished speaking, he waved his hand and asked them to scram. He walked back and forth in the hall a few times before he reached out and took out a communication jade talisman from his inner world. He reported everything that had happened here, including Fenglan's disloyalty and Corpse Puppet Ali's disobedience to his command to his master. Soon, the other party replied with a line of words, "Abandon all of them." This meant that he didn't want the mutated Shantian guards either. Branch Master Gong glanced at the transfer order for the Shantian guards in his hand and couldn't help but sneer. Bang! He smashed the transfer order into pieces. Chapter 2183. As though he still couldn't vent his anger, Hall Master Gong ruthlessly stomped on the shard again. Feng Lan thought she had won, but she would soon realize that she had utterly lost. The little stoic wasn't that easy to deal with. Naive. Besides, Master wouldn't let this matter pass so easily. Only death awaited Feng Lan. At this time, outside the bamboo building, the battle between Arbor's group and the bald woman and Feng Lan's group was nearing its end. From beginning to end, the bald woman hadn't been able to take a single step past the lightning bolt. She could only glare furiously and madly at Arbor through the defensive fire wall as she cursed. However, her curses seemed to be stuck in her throat, making it completely indiscernible. It was extremely strenuous for her to even pronounce the two words Arbor, let alone curse normally. Arbor expressionlessly glanced at this person. He only felt that the veins on that woman's bald head were bulging one by one. As far as the eye could see, they looked like earthworms twisting crookedly on her head, making him instinctively feel extremely disgusted. Aurora! The bald woman roared at the sky in extreme grief and indignation. She pounced down again and again, crashing into Emolien's defensive fire barrier. As a result, she was flung back again and again. She was covered in cuts and bruises, but she still couldn't break through the defensive wall. Her furious gaze landed on Emolien, and she roared at Emolien for a while. Emolien simply didn't know what this person was roaring about. He only lowered his head to check on his wife's body. "Are you frightened? My Jojo, don't look at such an ugly thing. It stings your eyes." Arbor patted his chest. "I'm not scared at all. At least, her appearance isn't much different from a normal person's. It's better than those zombies that shed rotten flesh as they run, right?" "Fuck, the zombies that shed rotten flesh as they run are here." Dao Wuji's ghostly wails and howls came from the other end. Arbor's mouth twitched as he turned around to take a look. His eyeballs nearly popped out. Was this really true? All of a sudden, the back of the row of bamboo houses began to swarm. One after another, graceful zombies emerged from the back of the bamboo houses and lunged at little Taisui and the others. Jojo bro jinxed it. "Oh my, you scared this little sister to death." Fairy Ginkgo stretched out 2 fingers and gently patted her chest. In the blink of an eye, she savagely beat the few corpse puppets that had pounced over into pieces and rolled on the ground. Peony's movements were even more swift. She directly smashed down several lightning bolts, turning several corpses that were squeezed together into a pile of charred bones. Ma Shurchin laughed and said, "It's over. The entire mountain is covered with corpse puppets. Where did so many zombies come from?" Little Taisui also furrowed his brows. 100,000 Shantian guards? No way. Endless Blade immediately cried out exaggeratedly, "Talent! Could it be that they turned the 100,000 Shantian guards into corpse puppets because they wanted to deal with us? Oh wait, the Feng family is here, and a swarm of corpse puppets has appeared among the Shantian guards. Could it be that these Shantian guards aren't Gung Pengcheng's private army, but rather a team assembled by the Feng family?" Everyone looked at Endless Blade with measuring eyes. Heavens, Endless Blade could actually come up with such an analysis. This was the first time this had ever happened. Everyone revealed expressions of admiration and looked Endless Blade up and down again. Arbor also glanced at Endless Blade, giving him a look that said, "This child is worth teaching. This brother's IQ is finally online." Chapter 2184. Yuan Shurchin was not stingy with her praise. "It's rare to see you so smart. You must have paid a lot of attention to improving your brain recently." "It's good to improve your brain," little Taisui chimed in. Since it's so effective, remember to improve your brain often in the future. Don't make it worse. Fuck you. Dao Wuji glared at Yuan Shurchen in annoyance, then glared at little Tai Sui. It's rare for me to be wise, but there are so many people who can't stand to see me doing well, and are mocking me. What the hell is going on? Dao Wuji rolled his eyes and glared back at them one by one. I'll take out a small notebook later, and write them down one by one. In the future. I'll mock them back. Everyone looked at the endless stream of zombies and charged forward with their sabers. This time they had to be serious. Feng Lan looked on coldly for a while. Seeing that the bald woman who had been hovering in the air was unable to break through Prince Mo's defense line, she couldn't help but frown. This young couple was really detestable. Feng Lan waved her hand, and 4 or 5 maids immediately came over with a cart of spiritual energy balls. They put 3 or 4 spiritual energy balls into something that looked like a small catapult, and aimed it in the direction of Emolien and Arbor. A chilly glint leaked out of Feng Lan's eyes. Qiao Mu, was it you people who harmed my husband and stole his soul? With a flick of Qiao Mu's finger, several hundred defensive talismans made from ebony flew out. They circled around Emolien's defensive fire wall, and tightly encircled the fire wall, adding 2 layers of protection. Feng Lan questioned sternly, "What? You dare to do it but don't dare to admit it?" "Why wouldn't I dare to admit it?" Arbor sneered. "You reap what you sow. Gung Pengcheng sent people to trick me and assassinate me many times. Why can't I retaliate? Am I a pitiful little girl who can be beaten and scolded? Is it my fault that I resisted?" Feng Lan stared at her with a pale face and anxiously cursed. "Old Gung has never met you before. Why did he?" Halfway through her words, Feng Lan paused as a faint light of understanding flashed in her eyes. "What's your relationship with Long Chuan? Are you?" Arbor's expression changed. Just as he was about to fly out of the defensive layer, Emolien suddenly reached out and hugged him tightly. "Don't be fooled. This woman is trying to lure you over." Emolien looked at Feng Lan indifferently, a trace of coldness flashing in her eyes. "It doesn't matter if you don't say it. We can probably guess it. Although the Shuntian Prefecture's prefecture lord married you, he probably never had you in his heart. You're talking nonsense." Feng Lan's face instantly twisted. Emolien was actually just bluffing her a little. But who would have thought that Feng Lan would be duped by him at once? Hence, he had a better grasp of the situation. He looked at Madame Neifeng with a sneer and said, "Your husband has someone else in his heart. That person should be a member of the Mu clan, right?" Feng Lan's pupils almost shrank. What kind of emotion could make a person willingly self-detonate their spiritual conscience in order to keep the secret with them? Emolien smiled faintly as he sized up the pale-faced Feng Lan. "I can understand Prefecture Lord Gung's actions very well. In this world, only true love can make a man willingly go to such lengths." Chapter 2185. Arbor blinked and looked up at her husband. "Is that so?" She turned her head and glanced at Feng Lan, whose face had turned green and white. She suddenly felt that the crown prince seemed to have guessed correctly. Looking at Feng Lan's extremely pale complexion, she probably knew that her husband had someone else in his heart. He should only be guessing. "Why does Manor Lord Gung want to deal with my Jojo?" Emolien continued faintly. "You probably know a little, but I'm afraid you don't know the specifics of what he's done. Based on your relationship as husband and wife, Manor Lord Gung shouldn't have told you about the missions he took on outside of Sky Fate, right? The person Gung Pengcheng wants to protect at all costs. Your love rival, that Mu family member, although she didn't do anything, she easily stole your husband's heart. Your life is truly pitiful, always living under the shadow of another person. You're in pain, you're struggling, and you're tormented. But to Manor Lord Gung, you're as insignificant as a speck of dust. You won't attract any of his attention. You've fallen deeply in love with your husband for decades, but unfortunately, the person you love is willing to sacrifice everything for another woman, even to the point of self-detonating his spiritual sense." When Emolien's venomous tongue flared up, not to mention a mentally wounded woman, even someone with a strong psychological resistance wouldn't be able to withstand it. "Shut up," Feng Lan screamed agitatedly. Arbor opened her small mouth and looked up at her husband with adoration. Heavens! Her husband had actually guessed correctly. Emolien lowered his head to look at the little fellow, and he tapped her small head lightly with a finger in amusement. Jojo was good at everything, but she was always a bit muddle-headed when it came to matters of the heart. If you want her to guess why Gung Pengqing self-detonated, she might as well kill Gung Pengqing directly. With her EQ, it was impossible for her to understand why Gung Pengqing would go to such lengths for a woman. Oh, maybe she wouldn't even be able to guess that the person Gung Pengqing wanted to protect was a woman. Why should I shut up? Emolien continued to provoke the woman. You pitiful and sad woman. Have you ever thought that the man you're risking everything to take revenge for has never cared about you in his entire life? You're really wishful thinking. Wuxia was speechless. This guy's mouth was really poisonous. Even a man like him couldn't stand it, let alone this crazy woman in front of him. Feng Lan's mind was filled with the thought that he had self-detonated. He had self-detonated. His spiritual sense had self-detonated. He had detonated his spiritual sense for that woman. He wasn't killed by someone else, but by his own self-detonation. He blew himself up. Ah! Although the young man in front of him had a vicious mouth, there was one thing he was right about. She had taken over Gung Pengqing's position and worked hard to take revenge. However, in Gung Pengqing's heart, he probably didn't care whether she would take revenge for him or not. But even if he told her this, even if that was the case, she still couldn't control her final feelings. She was like a burning devil's snare, poisonous but beautiful. Perhaps only death would be her final destination. Shut up. I don't want to listen to you anymore. Shut up, shut up, shut up. Feng Lan let out a shrill shriek as her eyes turned red. Arbor looked at her crazy appearance and couldn't help but sigh softly. Chapter 2186. Emolien coldly glanced at Feng Lan. Do you know why he blew himself up? Because your love rival, that woman's subordinate, wanted to betray her and say that woman's name. In the end, Gung Pengqing hugged your love rival's subordinate and blew himself up, taking that subordinate with him to the afterlife. Look how much he cherished your love rival. Ah! Feng Lan's eyes were bloodshot. Sure Huixin. Sure Huixin. I won't let you off, you bitch, bitch, bitch. She screamed crazily. This scream came from the bottom of her heart. Sure Huixin. Arbor coldly said this stranger's name. In all these years, she had never heard of this name. This name, which Emolien spent a lot of effort to trick out of Feng Lan's mouth, was Sure Huixin. Was she her mother's former enemy? Was she also her current enemy? Emolien was holding his wife, so he naturally knew that the little fellow's emotions were fluctuating, and her breathing was fluctuating. Thus he lowered his head and whispered in her ear. Don't take it too seriously. Maybe Sure Huixin is an imaginary enemy that Feng Lan conjectured herself. This matter still needs to be investigated, so I'll have someone do it. Shut up. Shut up, shut up. Separated by a layer of defensive firewall and 2 layers of ebony defensive array. Although Feng Lan couldn't clearly hear what the two were whispering about, she was already in a deranged state, and she screamed angrily out of humiliation. All of you shut up. Arbor coldly glanced at her and didn't say anything. Just as Emolien said, whether everything was true or not still needed further investigation. She didn't want to listen to Feng Lan's one-sided story. Of course, if this woman, Sure Huixin, really had a problem, she wouldn't let her off. Jojo. Emolien reached out and stroked the hair on her temples, saying softly, Don't worry. I'm here for everything. Arbor nodded and turned to look at Feng Lan, who was in a deranged state. Feng Lan was greatly shocked. At this time, she was still unable to recover from the news that Gung Pengqing had self-destructed because of that woman. She raised her hand crazily, and a few servants immediately pulled the mechanism of the catapult with a sullen face. After a few whooshing sounds, the entire catapult trembled slightly, and several balls of spiritual energy were launched out with a series of bangs. Like shooting stars, several spiritual energy balls landed on the defensive talisman matrix that Xiao Mu had set up with a thud. The defensive array glyphs were instantly smashed by the spiritual energy ball. The entire array glyphs were instantly turned into fine powder. Arbor coldly glanced over, and his gaze fell on Madame Feng's face, who seemed to have gone mad. I want all of you to die here today, Madame Feng screamed. Her body was like a willow leaf, trembling in the wind. Arbor die, Madame Feng screamed and waved her hand heavily. Immediately, 4 or 5 spirit energy balls rushed towards the defensive array glyphs, set up in Arbor under her command. Boom! The entire array glyphs were once again turned into nothingness in this violent tremor. At this point, the 2 layers of array glyphs set up by Arbor were completely destroyed by the spiritual energy balls. Xiaomu creased her brows and swept an indifferent glance at Madame Neifeng. This person wasn't a cultivator. She was just an ordinary woman who had coincidentally obtained the special ability of speed and strength. Originally, it was impossible for her to break Arbor's double array glyphs by herself. Chapter 2187. Arbor glanced at Madame Feng in displeasure. Just as she was about to throw out more defensive array glyphs, Emolian reached out and pressed down on her small hand. Wait a moment, he said softly as he held her hand. 1 or 2 of these spiritual energy balls couldn't break Jojo's defensive array glyphs. But releasing several of them in a row with this kind of dispenser was very powerful. He didn't want Jojo's defensive array glyphs to be broken by that woman every time. Rather than letting his wife waste her energy, it was better for him to deal with this woman. He waved his hand, and clusters of gorgeous red flames jumped between his fingers like dancing fairies. Xiaomu raised her head to look at him. She saw these clusters of small flames that resembled fairies slowly fusing together. Then, a purple flame sprang up from within, and completely merged with the scarlet flame. Whoosh! That flame pounced at Feng Lan as fast as lightning. Feng Lan shouted loudly, "This kind of speed can't hurt me at all." Just as she finished speaking, Feng Lan felt as if she was hit by a huge force. Her entire body was instantly enveloped by heat. The red and purple flames completely wrapped around her limbs, giving off steaming hot flames. Feng Lan felt as if her bones were placed on top of a bonfire, and she couldn't move at all. Damn it! There was definitely something strange about the man in front of her. His fire spiritual energy was completely different from others. She was actually slapped in the face. This thought flashed through Feng Lan's mind with grief and indignation. Her special abilities of speed and strength were completely useless in front of those who were truly supreme in terms of strength. Feng Lan didn't know that Emolian's fire spiritual energy was mixed with medicinal power. Naturally, it was different from others. Roar, roar. The special grade zombie named Ali suddenly roared, and a small spatial whirlpool suddenly appeared in front of Emolian. This whirlpool disappeared as quickly as it appeared. When Arbor reached out to grab it, Prince Mo's figure actually quickly disappeared in that whirlpool. This female zombie actually grasped the special ability of teleportation. Arbor looked at her dear husband, who was teleported away with a stunned expression. She was so angry that her head hurt. Her husband was taken away by a demon. This simply made her feel unwell. The little fellow didn't expect that this bald female zombie had actually comprehended a special ability. This was something she had never seen before. Her husband, Arbor waved out hundreds of butterflies and shouted in exasperation, "Go find that bald female zombie." Whoosh, 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 whoosh. A group of butterflies immediately flapped their wings and flew in all directions. At the same time, Hall Master Gong's group, who had already retreated from the valley, Gong coldly glanced at the bottom of the cliff. "Hall Master, do you want to burn the entire valley below?" Wu Meng made a gesture of setting fire to the valley. Hall Master Gong glanced at him indifferently, and the fat man called Wu Meng immediately stopped talking, because he knew when he needed to speak, and when he needed him to shut up. Just like now, Hall Master's meaning was very clear. He didn't want to make Arbor's group an enemy for the time being. Since that was the case, as a subordinate, it wasn't convenient for him to say anything. How should we report to Master about Ali when we return? Wu Meng couldn't help but ask. Hall Master Gong turned around and glanced at him indifferently. What's there to report? Chapter 2188. Wu Meng was slightly taken aback. Hall Master Gong glanced at him and said coldly, "I'll tell you the truth. Ali, this failed evolution product, doesn't have many days left to live. This was the first time Wu Meng had heard of this. He couldn't help but ask curiously, "Is what Hall Master said true?" Hall Master Gong nodded with a cold expression. Master has long since given up on this failed product. When this special class zombie was promoted to rank 2, she was given many precious medicines. Among them was a medicinal liquid specially used to promote special abilities. This special class zombie comprehended the special ability of spatial teleportation. Unfortunately, the teleportation range is limited to 100 feet, so it's practically useless. Her special ability was different from ordinary people's, which could be upgraded by absorbing the crystal cores in low-class zombies' brains. Her special ability was permanent. Her special ability would remain at whatever level it was supposed to be. She wouldn't be able to upgrade even half a step until she died. Therefore, although this person had become a special class zombie, it was useless. Her special ability level hadn't reached special class at all. Hall Master Gong silently looked up at the completely darkened sky. "Let's go. This valley couldn't be used anymore." The Shuntian sentinels were almost completely wiped out here. However, this didn't matter to Hall Master Gong. Since Master had given the order, then they should give up. Wu Meng turned back and looked deeply at the valley, before following Hall Master Gong's footsteps. With the two of them leaving like this, it meant that they had completely given up on the Shuntian sentinels and special class zombies. Of course, to them, Feng Lan was an existence they could do without. However, they couldn't help but feel that it was a pity for the 100,000 elite soldiers that they had painstakingly nurtured. After the two of them left, the deep valley below was still covered by smoke. The poisonous insects and creatures in the valley seemed to have sensed something, as they all crawled out of their nests and scrambled to climb up the cliff. For some reason, it felt like a storm was about to come. Feng Chen strode up to Qiaomu and stared at her small face that was flushed red from anger. Suppressing the laughter in his heart, he coughed lightly and reassured, "Don't worry, that female zombie's ability is limited. This venerable one doesn't think they can move too far." "This baldy caught my husband." Arbor was exasperated. She was really angry. That female monster had actually taken her husband away in front of her. How preposterous. Feng Chen coughed lightly when she heard this. "I don't think that spatial vortex is too big. I estimate that it's only about 100 feet in diameter. It won't exceed that by too much. Why don't we split up and look for it?" Arbor shook his head and looked at the black poison-tailed butterflies fluttering in the air. He said softly, "Let's go. We already have a direction." Feng Chen nodded and turned to give Dao Wuji and the others a look, telling them to continue to stay here and exterminate the corpse puppets that had lost their minds. He called little Tai Sui and followed Jojo and the poison-tailed butterfly to Emolien. The poison-tailed butterfly fluttered its wings and quickly led Arbor's group to a place. Walking into the valley from the valley, there was a small gurgling stream. Both paths were filled with lush trees. Behind the layers of trees, there was an old wooden house hidden in the middle. Arbor pushed aside the branches and rushed over. In the end, she saw a scene that made her very angry. Chapter 2189. The bald demoness had found a red veil from somewhere and covered her head. She was determined to grab Emolien's hand. Emolien dodged her several times, but was strangely trapped in the 4 small vortexes. No matter where he dodged, there was always the possibility of being sucked in. "Arbor!" Exclamation point. On the other hand, Feng Chen couldn't resist laughing. "My heavens, this zombie is disguised as a ghost. Does it want to marry Emolien?" Arbor quickly walked toward her husband. She originally wanted to avoid the spatial vortexes and fly to her husband's side, but the vortexes were very strange. Once a person got close, they would be sucked in by an endless suction force. Miss Chiao was furious. She looked coldly at the bald female zombie with the red veil, who was desperately trying to pounce to her husband's side. She was courting death. Xiao Mu's gaze harshly shot out a burst of water spiritual energy at the bald female zombie's back. The water spirit rippled into the air and instantly turned into millions of ice shards, which shot toward the bald female zombie's head. This sudden attack forced the female zombie to give up on pursuing Emolien and she could only turn around to deal with Xiaomu first. Arbor naturally wouldn't be polite with this monster. After the first wave of ice shards, the second wave came. Arbor had basically reached the point of perfection in the use of water and with spirit power. Thus, it was a piece of cake for her to consecutively unleash instantaneous attacks. Roar, roar, roar. After being smashed by 3 waves of ice rain, the special class zombie fell backward, dizzy and disoriented. With a wave of Xiaomu's small hand, rows of earth spikes burrowed out from under the special-level zombie's feet and abruptly transformed into several hundred confinement vines, firmly binding this special-level zombie's legs within the vines. This zombie could actually let out a very human-like scream. Arbor couldn't help but look at her a few more times. Compared to any of the corpse puppets in the past, the one in front of him clearly had a complete intelligence. She could even look at him with resentment in her eyes. However, a corpse puppet was still a corpse puppet. She was something that could be resurrected after death. Her value was very, very low. Roar! The special grade zombie lifted the red veil on its head and glared at Arbor in front of it. He seemed to be resentful that she had rushed over at such a critical juncture. Her wedding ceremony was ruined by this woman again. This vicious woman. It was her who had turned her into this state that was neither human nor ghost. It was her. He ordered her to be pushed down from the city gate tower to be fed to the zombies, making her suffer pain and torture before she died. Such a vicious woman was actually able to win Prince Mo's affections, and he actually treated her like the apple of his eye. On what basis? How was she inferior to this unruly, willful, arrogant, and unbridled woman in front of her? She Wei refused to accept this. Arbor's thoughts suddenly moved, and the startled swan dagger suddenly appeared and pierced through the special class zombie's left shoulder blade. As a corpse puppet, she naturally didn't feel any pain. But the startled swan dagger was no ordinary item. Therefore, after being pierced by the startled swan dagger, the bald female corpse puppet suddenly felt that her entire left arm couldn't move. It was unbearably stiff. After all, ever since she had advanced to become a special class zombie, her entire body was no different from a human's flexibility. But now that a trace of anger flashed across the bald female's face. Chapter 2190. Damn it. Finally, Xiaomu heard the bald female zombie's words clearly. As expected, this zombie already had emotions of its own, and could even curse people. Arbor glanced at her curiously, and then instinctively asked, "Do you have memories of when you were a human?" Roar. The female zombie roared angrily at Arbor. Her eyes flickered with a bone-deep hatred. Yes, she wanted nothing more than to kill Arbor right now. However, this woman's strength was several notches higher than before. It would be very difficult to kill her if she didn't succeed in one hit. Wei Mingli. The female zombie roared these words in a very strange voice. Xiaomu expended a great deal of effort before realizing that the 3 words she said were Wei something Li. Arbor carefully sized her up again and shook his head. "I don't know you." Fortunately, Wei Mingli couldn't be considered a human in essence. Thus, she didn't explode in anger at Arbor, but her eyes were filled with a strange look. At the same time, Emo Lian finally broke free of the 4-layered space vortex, set up by Wei Mingli with several lotus marks. She turned to look at Arbor. He hurriedly flew to her side, but before he could say anything to his wife, Wei Mingli was already beside him. On the side, Wei Mingli seemed to have been bewitched, pouncing on Crown Prince Emo the moment she saw him. This hungry tiger pouncing on its prey was extremely large. Arbor's eyelids twitched at the sight. Without thinking too much, he directly sent a flying kick towards Wei something Li. "What are you doing?" Not only did this whimsical female zombie want to secretly marry Emo Lian, but she also wanted to pounce on her husband right in front of her. She simply didn't know what death was. On the other side, Wei Mingli, who was blocked by Arbor, was 100 times more furious and tormented than Arbor. Especially when she saw Prince Emo walk over and naturally wrap his arm around the little girl's waist. Wei Mingli felt the world's malice toward her. His eyes were still so focused. Wei Mingli reflexively touched her vein-covered cheek. His face was truly frightening. Walking on the streets at night would probably scare people to death. In the past, when she was as beautiful as a flower, the crown prince didn't even spare her a glance, let alone now. But she couldn't accept it. Arbor, that little bitch, she didn't even remember who she was. Since that was the case, a vicious glint flitted across Wei Mingli's eyes. Wei Mingli abruptly jumped to her feet and screamed, "I'll let you completely remember who I am." Wei Mingli suddenly stretched out her hands and raised them toward the sky. Immediately, 7 or 8 spatial vortexes appeared around Arbor. It wanted to suck her in. Scram! Arbor couldn't help but get angry. This female corpse puppet actually wanted to transfer her out of here? He wanted to occupy her lotus with all his heart. Jojo. Emolienne only felt her heart skip a beat, and she was about to pounce over. Suddenly, a person rushed out from the side and pressed down on Arbor at an incomparably fast speed, forcefully flipping her to the ground. At the same time, Arbor only felt that the figure pressing down on top of her seemed to be squeezed by spatial power and vibrated. With a pft, she spat out a mouthful of blood. That person's aura instantly turned from strong to weak, becoming dispirited. Arbor narrowed her eyes at the woman pressing down on top of her, and her gaze couldn't help but become angry. Who told you to act on your own and save me? Sleep. Chapter 2191. Die! A dark red glint flashed through Arbor's eyes. In a split second, the soil in front of the female zombie started rolling, and countless rocks rained down on her head. Bam, bam, bam. After several bangs, Wei Mingli struggled and screamed. She barely revealed half her face from under the jagged rocks and screamed at Arbor. "Arbor, Arbor, you'll die a horrible death." Wei Mingli mumbled these words. To be honest, Miss Chiao couldn't hear a single word clearly. Her eyes were filled with the blood on her hands. This blood wasn't her own, but Yiling Min's. Yiling Min's body was stained with blood, and she was barely breathing. She looked like she wouldn't die in this world. Arbor looked down at her. He stretched out his small hand, and immediately stuffed several pills into Yiling Min's mouth. At the same time, he raised countless sharp ice spikes with his right hand, and pierced them toward the bald female zombie's head. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The sound of something breaking through the air rang out. Wei Mingli roared. Now that she was crushed under a pile of rocks, she was like a target. Naturally, the ice spikes hit her accurately. Hundreds of ice spikes immediately pierced her into a sieve. Boom! Wei Mingli's strength suddenly surged, and she abruptly shifted the pile of rocks on top of her. However, before he could get up, he felt that his limbs were entangled by endless vines. They wrapped around her tightly layer upon layer. She tried her best to break free, but unfortunately, after breaking free of one layer, dozens of layers of vines wrapped around her again. From afar, Wei Mingli seemed to have become a giant cocoon. Arbor knew that Feng Chen had made a move, so he immediately summoned the startled swan dagger, while Wei Mingli was entangled by the giant vines. The startled swan dagger buzzed in the air. It was connected to its master's mind, and it swiftly stabbed toward Wei Mingli's head. Ah! Wei Mingli let out a piercing scream. Being stabbed in the head by the startled swan dagger was no joke. However, Wei Mingli was already a special-grade zombie, and her head was much harder than any other zombies. The startled swan dagger failed to pierce through the special-grade corpse puppet's vital points, but it did cause some damage to her. This made Wei Mingli a little scared. She originally thought that after her body was made into a monster like a corpse puppet, both her strength and speed would be greatly improved. She even obtained a very rare dimensional vortex arcana. But now, she suddenly felt that she might not be as strong and invincible as she thought. She seemed to be able to die too. When Arbor realized that Wei Mingli hadn't been stabbed to death by the startled swan dagger, she couldn't help but frown. This female zombie, named Wei somethingly, seemed to have a brain structure that was very different from other low-level zombies. Just now, when the startled swan dagger pierced over, it actually could not pierce her in the slightest. His head was like an iron plate, and he couldn't go in at all. Arbor narrowed his eyes at Wei Mingli, feeling a little angry. The startled swan dagger was no ordinary spiritual weapon. Emolienne said that it was a growth-type weapon. In other words, as her cultivation level rose, this spiritual weapon could very likely advance to a divine weapon or even a holy weapon. Yet this startled swan dagger actually couldn't kill that zombie. Xiaomu clenched her fists and lowered her head to look at the silent Yi Lingmin. Chapter 2192. When she looked up to stare at the female zombie again, her eyes were already below the freezing point. A mere zombie dares to be so arrogant in front of me. Did she really think that there was nothing she could do to her? Arbor had already lost all patience with this fellow in front of him. He directly summoned a dozen or so explosive birds from Paradise Planet and had them carry out a suicidal explosion on Wei Mingli. The pile of rocks was blasted into pieces. Wei Mingli was sent flying by the shockwave. Emolien's finger moved, and a sharp arrow formed from purple flames instantly shot out. It only took one exchange before it burrowed out of Wei Mingli's head. Wei Mingli wanted to scream, but it was already too late. Her head was instantly like a watermelon that had been cut open. Half of it fell off one side, splitting into two in an instant. The way she died was very disgusting. Arbor swept a glance before retracting his gaze. Emolien's sharp arrow of purple flames just so happened to aim at Wei Mingli's head, and it completely pierced through Wei Mingli's terrified and incredulous gaze before she was completely done for was quite hilarious. What was there for her to be frightened and unable to understand? Could it be that she thought that Emolien would have tender, protective feelings for her? Simply laughable. From start to finish, Arbor still couldn't recall who this Wei Mingli was. Instead, it was the crown prince who remembered. This woman was precisely the bait used to feed the zombies when the Emo Kingdom capital was besieged by zombies. But all of this didn't matter anymore. Since his Jojo couldn't recall, then he shouldn't think about it. In any case, the trouble had already been resolved. Cough, cough, cough. Yi Lingmin coughed violently and slowly opened her eyes. The first thing she saw was Xiaomu's small, taut face. What did you run out for? Arbor reflexively grasped her wrist. You were corroded by the spatial compression force. You can't be saved, do you understand? Cough, cough. Yi Lingmin nodded with a bitter smile. Even if you didn't come out, nothing would have happened to me. Arbor said angrily. Yes. Yi Lingmin nodded weakly. Arbor pursed his lips and stared at her. Aren't you afraid of death? I'm afraid of death, junior sister. Yi Lingmin said with some difficulty. I only know, but I never thought that I would be able to see master and martial uncles after I die. Being able to see all my senior and junior sisters. I feel very comfortable in my heart. Are you stupid? Second Ant Master, and the 200 Holy Water Sect disciples are all alive and well. Where are you going to see them? Arbor wanted to punch her, but he didn't know where to start. Although Yi Lingmin didn't seem to have any external injuries after being squeezed by the power of space, it was obvious that her internal injuries were extremely serious. Her 5 viscera and 6 bowels had probably been crushed into powder under the spatial compression. Now he was just barely holding on to his last breath, hanging on to a little bit of his spirit, and talking to her like a dying flash. If Yi Lingmin hadn't rushed over and blocked the attack for her, she would have died. Xiaomu was very clear in her heart that she was probably going to run out of luck. Wei Mingli, this zombie, was more than just a little stronger than other people. She was unable to heal Yi Lingmin's injuries. Her 5 viscera and 6 bowels were already shattered, so there was no way to save her. Unless she could refine the crisis reversal pill now, perhaps she could save Yi Lingmin's life. Chapter 2193. However, it was a pity that being in a hurry could not put out a nearby fire. Looking at Arbor's dejected appearance, Yi Lingmin forced a smile. Don't be sad, little junior sister. I've been looking forward to this day for a full 3 years. This time, cough, 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 I can finally be free. I can finally go to the netherworld. I also have the face to see master. Yi Lingmin, who allowed you to die. Hang in there, Arbor said angrily. Don't think that dying is enough. You've done such a wrong thing. Why you still have to continue atoning for your sins? Continue. Arbor spoke incoherently. Unexpectedly, Yi Lingmin reached out to hold her small hand. Little junior sister, Yi Lingmin said softly. Forgive me, okay? Arbor pursed her lips and did not say anything. Yi Lingmin could not resist sighing. I will personally go down to the netherworld to atone for my sins. Yi Lingmin. Arbor resisted the urge to grab her and anxiously shouted, You must have the will to live. Yi Lingmin Yi. Yi Lingmin glanced at her one last time and said with a smile, Why, little junior sister? I still remember the first time we met at the Holy Water Sect. You pounced on me and used a bamboo chopstick to almost stab my eyes. You were really dazzling back then, Yi Lingmin said softly, her eyes starting to slacken. Yi Lingmin Yi. Arbor pursed her lips and did her best to hold back her tears. Yi Lingmin, the life-extending pill I gave you is so precious. You should at least hang in there for me. Hang in there for 4 hours, so I can think of another way. Yi Lingmin could no longer hear Arbor's voice calling for her. In front of her eyes, like water ripples, a scene of a busy street appeared. She could clearly see the subtle expressions on everyone's faces. She could see the wrinkles at the corners of a plump woman's eyes, and the blushes that the girls had put on. She had been squatting in the corner, hugging her knees. She had been squatting there for 2 days and 3 nights. He felt so hungry that he was about to explode. She was hungry. Her eyes were like a little beast's as she stared at the hibiscus cake in a child's hand. Suddenly, like a hungry tiger pouncing on its prey, he snatched the hibiscus cake and wolfed it down. Wah! The child's cries immediately attracted the attention of the child's mother. The child's mother was probably as big as a small hill. He picked her up and slapped her to the ground. Punches and kicks landed on her small body, kicking her until she almost doubted life. Just when she thought she was going to die, a heavenly voice said, What a shameless bully. Following that, the auntie, who was as sturdy as a small mountain, was sent flying by someone. That was really a flying kick. She raised her little head and giggled as she watched the auntie being kicked to the roof and hanging there. Although she was spitting blood, she still clapped her little hands happily. Look, the person who hit him was beaten up, right? Therefore, what mother taught was not wrong. Those who bully others will be bullied back one day. She raised her little face, her eyes shining as she looked at the woman in front of her. Chapter 2194. She felt that she probably wouldn't be able to forget this woman for the rest of her life. Her red clothes were alluring, and her face was exquisite and magnificent. She was like a blooming flower of flames, so dazzling that she almost couldn't turn her eyes away. She seemed to hear the woman's gentle voice. Are you willing to follow me to the Holy Water Sect? She nodded. At the same time, Yi Lingmin, who was gradually losing consciousness, also nodded. At some point in time, Yang Shirong was silently standing next to Arbor. She dazedly looked at Yi Lingmin, who was slowly walking away with a smile. Yi Lingmin seemed to have fallen asleep with a smile on her lips. No one knew that she seemed to be immersed in a dream right now. In this dream, she wantonly let herself wander further and further away, that she still remembered that it was truly a cold winter that year. Master bought her a set of cotton-padded jacket and trousers from a ready-made clothing store, and wrapped her up like a fulu doll. At that time, she saw her walking with a blue and white umbrella in front of her. She abruptly turned around and waved at her with a smile. Come here quickly. Yi Lingmin felt that Morong Sun was incomparably beautiful at that time. There was probably no one in this world who could compare to her. She only wanted to work hard to become the best disciple in Master's heart. She only was unwilling to lose to little junior sister. She only wanted Master to look at her more. She wanted Master to feel proud every time she mentioned Yi Lingmin. Unfortunately, it was an extravagant hope in the end. Yi Lingmin quietly left with a faint smile. Arbor reached out to touch her breathing. He bit his lips and angrily said, Yi Lingmin, who told you to die? Yang Shirong couldn't help but sigh. Let her die. This child didn't have the slightest will to live anymore. The reason why she flew out to protect Jojo today was most likely because she was prepared to die. If that's the case, then just let her be. Arbor lowered his head and reflexively tightly grasped Yi Lingmin's hand. Senior. Sister Yi. Yang Shirong patted Arbor's head. Jojo, don't be sad. This is Yi Lingmin's own choice. In the end, it all started because of her. Yang Shirong sighed. Let her be the one to end it. Arbor lowered his head and said nothing. Young Shirong couldn't help but sigh. Jojo, the dead are gone. What we need to do now is to look to the future. Arbor nodded. She understood the logic, but understanding was one thing. Seeing Yi Lingmin die with her own eyes was another. She really hated this senior sister in her heart. But watching her die with his own eyes, he felt very sad. It wasn't easy for the Holy Water sect to reach this point. Arbor said in a low voice, I hope that from now on, we won't have any more disciples making unnecessary sacrifices. She hoped that from now on, everyone in the Holy Water sect would be neat and tidy, and not a single person would be missing. Yang Shirong patted her head in relief. If it's our Jojo, I believe you can do it. After Second Ant Master said this, she glared fiercely at Prince Mo, who was trying to walk up and interrupt their conversation. Mo Lian glanced at Second Ant Master aggrievedly. When she saw Arbor looking over, she hurriedly flew over and hugged her, shouting, Jojo, Second Ant Master glared at me again just now. Do you have any fucking shame? Second Ant Master rolled her eyes grumpily at the sky. Xiao Mu was tormented by the two people's jesting, but half of the sorrow in her heart was washed away. Chapter 2195. Jojo, Mo Lian said angrily. Second Uncle Master doesn't like me. Arbor looked at her husband sympathetically. Husband, there's a reason why Second Uncle Master doesn't like you. What's the reason? Mo Lian asked curiously. You're beautiful. Arbor raised her small hand and stroked his chin, then floated away. Mo Lian! Exclamation point. Was he being teased by his wife? Yang Shirong. Arbor came to Yi Lingmin's side and put her bones into the peach blossom slope, then asked Little Tree to bury Yi Lingmin beside her senior sisters. Yi Lingmin's matter was considered to be over. Just as Second Uncle Master said, it was impossible to save a person who had lost the will to live no matter how much he wanted to. Reporting to the Crown Princess, we've found the Shentian Prefecture's prefecture lord in the dungeon. Bring them up. Xiao Mu reflexively looked behind Tong's group. Reporting to the Crown Prince, the Shentian Prefecture's people are basically under control. 1/3 of them have already mutated into zombie puppets. We're still not sure if the other 2/3 have mutated or not. When Mo Lian heard this, he nodded and said, then deal with the mutated zombie puppets. As for the remaining people, isolate them for the time being. If symptoms appear, kill them. The subordinate nodded in agreement and left to carry out the order. Arbor looked up at Prince Mo and reached out a small paw. Mo Lian looked at her in amusement and naturally reached out to grab her hand, pulling her to his side. What's wrong? When are we going to the Divine Lands? She really wanted to try her ship that could cross the 3 states and 6 prefectures. She wondered if the old man was bragging so well. Was it completely effortless to cross the Divine Lands? This was something that would only be known after trying. Eliminate the remaining military forces of the Shentian Prefecture. Let Dunza take charge here. In this way, there was no need to worry that Shentian Prefecture would stab Jojo in the back again. Xiao Mu nodded when she heard this. Turning his head, he saw Dun Zong being carried out. This was really flattering. Mo Lian's 2 subordinates found a rattan chair and carried Duanzong, whose body was tilted over. Beside Dun Zhu was a skinny dark-skinned boy. His eyes were full of spirit, and he was very clever. Arbor looked at his miserable appearance and couldn't help but cough softly and ask him, How are you, Dun Zhong? It would have been better if he didn't ask. But once he did, Dungeon almost jumped up from the rattan chair. Unfortunately, he didn't have the strength to do so, so he hadn't even lifted a finger yet. This person was covered in cuts and bruises from head to toe. He looked extremely miserable. Standing beside him was a skinny dark-skinned man. Arbor glanced at him, and the boy immediately bowed respectfully to her. Respected miss, my name is Meng Mai. Thank you for saving me previously. Arbor nodded at him and glanced at the listless Dungeon. You saved him? Meng Mai nodded his little head. I am now the Prefecture Lord's personal bodyguard. Since the Prefecture Lord doesn't despise me for being young, Meng Mai will naturally do my best for the Prefecture Lord. Arbor glanced at Dungeon with disdain. She didn't know what flowery words this guy used to trick this child into working for him. When Dungeon saw Arbor's gaze, he immediately became unhappy. Little master, Why are you looking down on me? Chapter 2196. Why would I need a reason to despise you? Arbor gave him a look that said, figure it out yourself. Then he walked to Dunju and squatted down. Reaching out to check his pulse, Arbor stared at Dunju for a while. Dunju immediately started to look nervous. What's wrong with my body? Is there a problem? How could this be? Can't you tell what's wrong with me? This guy was scaring himself for no reason. Before Arbor could say anything, he was already yelling, Little master, don't scare me. I finally have a body. I don't want my body to be taken away in less than 3 days. Arbor turned to look at him, threw his hand away, and said expressionlessly, the coating on your tongue is a little yellow. Have you been heaty lately? You also have stomach pains from time to time. Ah yes. Tun Tun immediately put on a fawning look and praised, Little master, your medical skills are really unparalleled. Arbor couldn't be bothered with this bootlicker and said, you have to eat at least 2 meals a day. I'll prescribe you some medicine for gastrointestinal problems later. Remember to take it on time. Dunju nodded. After Arbor threw down the prescription and left with Emolien. Only then did Dunzong exclaim, God, he was fooled by Jojo. Since the topic had changed, he had forgotten to pour out his grievances and strongly request for a change of body. He was such a pig. He knew that the couple was a scam. In the end, they let him into the trap with just a few words. He completely forgot about the important matter he wanted to ask. Dunju was so angry that he pounded the armrest of the chair back and forth. He couldn't help but yell in the direction the couple left. Little master, come back here. This little guy is really troublesome. Emolien looked down at Arbor and reached out to touch his head. Jojo, what did you say just now? It's just a trick, Arbor said expressionlessly. Eating it won't hurt anyway. There is nothing wrong with his body. The main thing is that his external injuries are more serious. When the time comes, I will teach Meng Mai and let him help Dun Shu apply the wound. Emolien held back her laughter and nodded. Dun Tun was right. The little guy was really cunning. The two of them found a place where the sun was shining and sat down, waiting for Tong's report. After half an incense stick's worth of time, Tong came running over with his men. Your Highness, the big and small corpse puppets have been eliminated. Emolien nodded. Pack up and get ready to leave. Everyone immediately decided to leave the valley. Before leaving, Emolien set a small fire in the valley. Prince Emo had reinforced a hidden barrier around the valley to prevent the fire from spreading. After doing all this, the young couple held hands and was about to leave. Emolien instinctively leaned towards Jojo and glared at Yang Shirong. This is my Jojo. Second Uncle Master. You're not going to break us up, are you? That's not right, Second Uncle Master. Jojo and I love each other more than gold. Our feelings for each other are strong. As Emolien spoke, she clasped Arbor's small hand tightly. After saying a few words, she lowered her head and asked Arbor, Is it Jojo? Arbor instinctively nodded. No one can separate us. Is it Jojo? Xiaomu dazedly nodded her head again. Second Uncle Master, your cold expression is very strange. Emolien huffed angrily. Chapter 2197. Jojo likes me so much. If she doesn't have me, what will she do? Am I right, Jojo? Xiaomu might have been listening to what Emolien was saying at the beginning, but after he spoke so much, Xiaomu only nodded her head as per her usual habit. She simply didn't listen to what this guy was saying. Prince Emo already knew about this habit of Jojo's. Hence, he said a series of words, and sure enough, the little guy followed suit and nodded. Yang Shirong, who was standing at the side, was so angry that she laughed at Emolien. It was obvious that this guy had figured out Jojo's pattern and was waiting to trick her. Second Martial Ant looked unhappy and reached out to pull Arbor to her side. Jojo, you're so silly. If you get sold, you'll have to pay back the money. Arbor wanted to say that she was silly, but on account of Second Martial Ant's face, she didn't argue. Yang Shirong pulled Arbor and flew out of the valley. Along the way, she couldn't help but exhort. Jojo, you're still young. Don't be in such a hurry to get married. Second Martial Ant, I've been married for a long time. Young Shirong was speechless. What a disappointing little guy. Second Ant Master grumpily glared at Xiao Mu. When he glanced back and saw that Emolian had caught up, he quickly grabbed Xiao Mu's small hand and sped up. Emolian was so angry that she laughed. What was Second Martial Ant trying to do? She was trying to stir up trouble. His Jojo. Emolian's Jojo was pulled away by Second Martial Ant Young Shirong. From a distance, the little guy looked back at him reluctantly. Then he waved at him. Lian, I'll leave everything here to you. Emolian was speechless. Why did she suddenly have a strange sense of danger? Jojo's family was not easy to get along with. They were not as honest as Qiao Zhongbang and his wife. Not easy to deal with. Emolian sighed and looked up at the bright sky. Swoosh. His figure immediately vanished. After returning to the inn, Yang Shirong patted her little niece's head and said with a smile, "Do you want to go into seclusion? From what I see, you should stabilize your cultivation level first." Arbor opened her small mouth and was about to speak when Prince Emo entered through the window. Without saying a word, he rushed out of the window with his little wife in his arms. Yang Shirong looked at the window in confusion. Was she hallucinating just now? Emolian, that bastard, was like a fucking robber. He just grabbed his wife and ran away. What kind of crown prince was this unreliable guy? It's him. Forget it. On the other side, Yang Shirong was secretly ridiculing Emolian's actions. On the other side, Emolian, who was hugging his little wife, couldn't help but sigh in relief. Wife. What? Arbor glared at the man in annoyance. Second Martial Uncle is talking to me. We have to pack up and go to the Divine Land. Time is of the essence. We have to leave now. Arbor's two black eyes widened in an instant. But husband, didn't you just say that you have to wait until Dun Zhong has completely mastered the affairs of Shuntian Prefecture and wipe out the remaining forces? Whoever wants to do that can do it. His wife is still the most important. His wife is about to run away because of Second Martial Uncle's instigation. How can he not be anxious? Take out your little boat. Let's not bother about Second Martial Uncle. Let's go. Why did this normal couple make it seem like they were eloping? Arbor felt a little incredulous. Run away without Second Martial Uncle's knowledge? Chapter 2198. Are you sure you won't be beaten to death by Second Uncle Master? You. Why do you care so much? Emolian hugged his little wife and said anxiously, "There's no time like the present. Let's set off today." Why, you're so quick-witted. It's too hilarious. Xiao Mu gazed at her dear hubby speechlessly. Hubby? She looked at him seriously and raised her hands to pull his neck down. No matter what Second Uncle Master says, we're still husband and wife. Why are you in such a hurry? When Yang Shirong came over, she happened to hear this. She was so angry that her teeth ached. Although Emolian, that punk, was pretty good in all aspects. But in Yang Shirong's eyes, this guy was just someone to make do with. If her martial niece didn't like him, no matter how many Emolians were stacked together, he wouldn't be good enough for her Qiao. Sensing that Second Uncle Master was looking down on him, Emolian cautiously leaned toward Arbor and looked at Second Uncle Master warily. Jojo, your Second Uncle Master doesn't like me again. Arbor nodded her little head. You're beautiful. She doesn't think you're that reliable. Emolian. What kind of weird reason was that? Yang Shirong looked at the couple exasperatedly and asked with her hands behind her back. Tell me the truth. Are you really planning to go to China? The young couple nodded in unison. I'm not asking you. Yang Shirong rebuked Prince Emo angrily. It was all because of this guy's instigation. Otherwise, her Qiao wouldn't have thought of going to China. What was so good about China? She was unfamiliar with the place and people. Moreover, her Qiao was just a little kid. Wasn't it a little unreasonable to venture into China alone? It felt like it was too early. She should at least raise her realm and become a level 10 great spiritual master. Only then would she feel assured. Arbor looked at her Uncle Master's worried gaze and said expressionlessly, Second Uncle Master, don't worry. I'll take you with me. Second Uncle Master was speechless. Let's go to the Divine Land and find a good place for our sect to rebuild. Yang Shirong's eyes brightened. will inflict heavy losses on the holy water sect in the divine province? Why did it sound so tempting? Arbor nodded. Find a divine realm. Build it there. The corners of second uncle's mouth twitched when he heard this. Jojo, I heard that there are only a few god realms in the entire upper 3 continents. Moreover, the good god territories have basically been taken over by some major forces. Occupied. Arbor blinked and turned to look at Emolien. Husband, don't worry, just snatch it. Yang Shirong silently rolled her eyes. She snorted and glanced at the kid. You make it sound so simple. One of the divine realms is under your father's name, right? Really? Emolien was stunned for a moment before she nodded and said, Then let him give us the realm of the gods as a wedding gift. Arbor nodded, agreeing with Prince Mo's words. Yang Shirong's mouth twitched. She looked at Prince Mo and then at their Qiao. She suddenly understood. Why were the two of them so compatible? So it was called the same black-hearted. How could the two of you be so greedy? And make it sound like there was no suspense. Just like that divine realm was already in the bag for the two of them, that the great emperor of the divine land must have had 8 lifetimes of bad luck to have such a deceitful son. Yang Shirong rolled her eyes. When are we going? Chapter 2199. In a few days. Immediately, Arbor and Emolien gave different answers at the same time. Yang Shirong glared at Emolien in exasperation. What do you mean immediately? We have to prepare for China. What do we have to prepare? Aren't the things in our inner world? Scram. Second Uncle Master roared like a lion. Emolien looked pitifully at his Qiao. Second Uncle Master roared at me. Arbor quickly patted his hand. That's how Second Uncle Master is like. You'll get used to it. Yang Shirong felt that this did not sound like a compliment. She glanced at the couple and continued. Jojo, don't be anxious. It's always good to prepare more. Who knows what you'll face when you go to China? Before Yang Shirong could finish, Emolien waved at her. Second Uncle Master, don't worry. I'll take care of everything. You're the one who's worrying. Yang Shirong snorted. This Emo fellow could even snatch her Qiao and run away at the inn. Who knew what he would do in the future? The child was all grown up. It was really worrying. Yang Shirong sighed and followed the two of them with her hands behind her back. The next day, Arbor and Emolien slept until late in the morning before they got up. After the two of them finished washing up and were about to go downstairs for lunch, the shopkeeper ran upstairs and respectfully handed the two of them an invitation. Emolien reached out to take it. After turning it over and over to examine it, his lips involuntarily curled into a sneer. Who sent the invitation? Who else could it be? Emolien pulled Arbor's hand and walked downstairs. The one from the Wang family of Jianpain. Emo-kun. Prince Emo nodded. What did he send the invitation for? Emolien's face was full of mockery. She flipped the invitation over and over again. Then, she raised a red flame and burned it to ashes. That person from the Wang family of Jianpain said that he was rude to me last time and wanted to use the banquet as an excuse to apologize to me. Oh, Arbor didn't say anything. Emolien looked down at her in amusement. What do you think? Do I have to go? Arbor snorted. What good can there be in those foppish gatherings? Isn't it just singing and dancing, and finding some scantily clad women to accompany them? Emolien's eyes lit up. She turned the little guy around to face her. Jojo, are you jealous? Bah! Why would she be jealous? Miss Qiao snorted stubbornly and glanced at Prince Emo. Are you still going? The crown prince immediately shook his head. No, no, no. Miss Qiao's little face was no longer so tense. Emolien held her little hand and walked down the stairs. Immediately, she saw Second Uncle Master sitting by the window and looking at her with a ladylike face. She hurriedly pulled Arbor over. Second Uncle Master. Prince Emo bowed respectfully to Yang Shirong. Yang Shirong, who had wanted to rebuke this fellow, was suddenly speechless that this brat always acted obedient in front of Jojo. That face of his really made her unable to get angry. Jojo, if we want to go through the passage in China, we'll have to wait for at least 4 months. No need. Arbor shook her head. I have my own ways to get there. You don't have to worry about this. As she spoke, the wind chimes at the door rang. A dozen or so women with slender waists walked in from outside, walking towards Crown Prince Emo with a clear goal in mind. Chapter 2200. Emo Lien's eyelids twitched as a bad premonition flashed across his heart. Sure enough, the dozen or so women were walking towards him. They lined up in a row and bowed to Prince Emo. They said in unison, "Your concubines greet your highness the crown prince." Young Shirong was so angry that her face turned green. She slapped the table so hard that a corner of the table fell to the ground. Who are these people? This stinking brat. My impression of him had changed a little, but I didn't expect him to be this kind of person. Young Shirong's face was saying, "You're not satisfied with my chow, and you're making so many women?" Her expression, if that gaze could be turned into a solid blade, it would probably be able to stab Prince Emo twice. Emo Lien's face darkened as he suppressed his anger. He glanced at the women. "Who are you?" "We are here on the orders of the Crown Prince of Jianping, to bring your highness the Crown Prince to the residence for a gathering." "Emo Lien, Crown Prince of Jianping, do you want to die?" "Arbor, Crown Prince of Jianping, you're really tired of living." Yang Shirong slammed the table and pulled Arbor away. "Jojo, why are you still staying here? Haven't you bullied us enough?" "Second Uncle Master." Emo Lien hurriedly stood up and pulled his chow to his side. "I don't know these people. Just tell them to scram." Arbor glanced at the dozen women with heavy makeup. "You're the Crown Prince of Jianping's Crown Prince's dancers?" The women shook their heads. Yang Shirong's expression softened a little. Who the hell knew who the Crown Prince of Jianping was? But since they weren't the Crown Prince of Jianping's dancers, they might just be ordinary maids who were dressed a little flirtatiously. Unexpectedly, the leader of the dancers looked shyly at Emo Lien. "We're the Crown Prince's people." "The Crown Prince? Arbor? Where did this bunch of idiots come from? How dare they pretend to be the Crown Prince's people? The Crown Prince has already given us to your highness. I hope your highness won't despise us for being clumsy." Yang Shirong flipped over the table in front of her at once and pulled Xiaomu away, without another word. The Crown Prince hurriedly stood up with a dumbfounded expression and chased after the two of them. Yang Shirong pulled Arbor and ran at lightning speed. In a flash, they were already far away from the inn. Arbor couldn't help but sigh. He tugged at Yang Shirong's hand and said, "Second Martial Aunt." Yang Shirong turned to look at her and said seriously, "Child, have you thought it through? When you go to the Divine Land, if you go there as the Crown Princess, there will be many troubles and dangers." Arbor nodded. "I know, Second Martial Uncle." Yang Shirong looked at her again and said unhappily, "Child, with your qualifications, you can easily find 8 or 10 Emo Lien, let alone one. Look at this kid, he's not that good." Yang Shirong continued to ridicule. "He's surrounded by a flock of women. Who knows when someone will shove someone to his side?" "It's fine. The house is big and we need many servants," Arbor said mildly. Second Martial Aunt's eyes widened. "You?" Had he already thought of a way out for the dozen or so kabuki girls? "Sweeping, mopping, tidying the courtyard. There will be many officials in the Crown Prince's residence in the future. There will be places for these people to work." "That's right." Chapter 2201. Prince Emo, who had hurried over, heaved a sigh of relief when he heard this. He was afraid that Jojo would misunderstand him. Unexpectedly, the little guy trusted him so much. This made him very happy from the bottom of his heart. "Have those people been arranged?" Arbor glanced sideways at Prince Emo and asked with a snort. "Yes, I've asked the butler to assign them. Let them do some cleaning work in the future. That shouldn't be a problem, right?" Arbor was very satisfied. On the other hand, Yang Shirong's tense face finally relaxed a little. "You really sent them to do the cleaning?" Emo Lien nodded and looked at Yang Shirong seriously. "Second Uncle Master, don't worry. They're only fit to do the cleaning work. I'm afraid they won't be able to do the more delicate work." Yang Shirong was speechless. Sure enough, this Emo Lien was a guy who dug endless pits. But then again, her family's Jojo seemed to have said before that he would send those dancers to do the cleaning work, that the two of them did not speak at all. But in the end, they used the same method to deal with those dancers. It was obvious that the two of them were at the same level of swindling. Yang Shirong didn't know if she should feel comforted or pity for those dancers. Second Uncle Master, don't worry, Arbor said softly to Yang Shirong. Lien has never done anything to hurt me in all these days. Yang Shirong looked at Emo Lien, and her expression softened a little. Emo Lien hurriedly struck while the iron was hot and continued. Second Uncle Master, don't worry. I won't do anything that will harm Jojo. Yang Shirong looked at him from head to toe and snorted. Your status is there for all to see. When we return to China, Jojo said that there won't be any trouble. But I don't believe him. There will be trouble, Emo Lien said with a very good attitude. But I'll solve it for Jojo. As long as I'm here, Jojo won't have to face any trouble alone. Yang Shirong nodded her head in acknowledgement of him. Speaking of which, the Crown Prince was really evil. Yang Shirong thought to herself. If she hadn't seen it with her own eyes, and witnessed the way he handled things, she really wouldn't have known that under this kid's gentle appearance, there was actually a thick black heart. Arbor reached out and grabbed Prince Mo's hand. The Crown Prince of Jianping has repeatedly urged you to come. Do you still want to go? Go, why wouldn't I? Emo Lien's lips curled into a cold smile. Emo Kuan, that brat, had nearly caused his second martial uncle's impression of him to drop below the freezing point. Damn it, second martial uncle already didn't like him enough. Now it was almost worse. This made Prince Mo extremely unhappy. Prince Mo, who originally didn't plan to attend this banquet, suddenly decided to go if he didn't go. How could he kill Mo Kuan openly? Arbor looked at his expression and looked up to ask, You've decided to go? Emo Lien nodded, and reached out to hold her delicate wrist. Let's go together. Miss Chiao pursed her lips. They didn't invite me. That invitation clearly stated that it was for Emo Lien to go alone. Emo Lien raised his hand with a smile, and planted a kiss on the back of her hand. MHM, come with me. You're my wife. If you don't go, I won't go either. Inviting me is inviting you, Emo Lien said softly. We're one. Chapter 2202. Arbor cast a glance at him. You don't mind that I'm in your way? Emo Lien was taken aback, but then he smiled and hugged her tightly, gently lifting her up so that she was at eye level with him. My Jojo, you're jealous. Pooh. Arbor suddenly thought of something. When he turned around and saw Second Uncle Master's feminine face, he immediately exclaimed, Second Uncle Master is beside us. This stinking brat's nonchalant manner was too detestable. Yang Shirong snorted and waved her hand. I can't be bothered with you guys. Make preparations earlier if you're going to China. Don't leave out a single thing that you should prepare. Going to China isn't the same as staying at home. Don't procrastinate, and do things that make me uneasy. Procrastinate? Uneasy? Was Second Uncle Master talking about things like kissing and hugging? Emo Lien and the little fellow's beady black eyes met, and he couldn't resist chuckling. He hugged her and gave her a kiss. My Jojo, don't worry. Even if your Uncle Master wants to break up an affectionate couple, it won't work. If she doesn't let me see you, I'll definitely come see you even if I have to climb through the window and dig a tunnel. Thanks. Arbor rolled his eyes at him. That adorable expression tickled Emo Lien. Let's go. I'll dress you up when we return to the room. We'll go meet that fool in a bit. The vassal prince of Jianping had been pacing back and forth in the study since early in the morning. At this time, there were two other people sitting in his study. The two of them looked like a pair of twins. They were about 40 years old, and their appearances carried a hint of sharpness and harshness. Vassal prince, there's no need to be so anxious. One of them couldn't resist shaking his head and saying, You don't know, but that guy is especially formidable. Emo Kuan couldn't help but shudder in fear when he recalled the scene that day. The people around Emo Lien didn't look like ordinary people. The moment they made a move, it was obvious that a few minor mystic cultivators absolutely couldn't deal with them. Chi, the twin on the left, couldn't help but sneer. That crown prince has been growing up on Seikong planet in the lower realm for several decades. Even if that group of people from the Council of Elders went over to impart their experience, you should also know that in a lower realm place like Seikong planet, the spiritual energy is very thin, and even mystic energy is rarely seen. I've also heard that spirit masters are extremely precious in the lower realms. Another man smiled and said, even if that person started cultivating in his mother's womb, he might not be able to break through to the spirit realm, right? When Emokun heard this, he didn't show much joy. Instead, he said very nervously, then you don't understand the Crown Prince at all. The Crown Prince is definitely not as simple as you think. Your Highness, Your Highness. A man who looked like a manservant quickly walked in and bowed in greeting. Emokun's face lit up. Did His Highness the Crown Prince accept the beauties I gave him? The manservant looked at Emokun awkwardly, nodded and then shook his head. What do you mean by nodding and shaking your head? Your Highness, then. The Crown Prince did accept the beauties you gave him. Emokun slapped his thigh and said joyfully, then isn't that great? Why are you still shaking your head, punk? I knew it. This Emolien was merely putting on an act. Didn't he still accept my beauties? The manservant said with a sullen face. This lowly one heard that the beauties we sent over were all sent to be cleaning maids by Prince Mo's men. You still think that you used the honey trap correctly? Chapter 2203. Emokun widened his eyes in shock. Are you telling the truth? Emolien, that brat, really sent all the beauties he sent over to sweep the streets. He actually dared to do such a thing. Emokun was so angry that his gums hurt. His eyes were dark and gloomy as he stared at the pageboy like a venomous snake. The pageboy hurriedly crawled on the ground and kowtowed. This is the news I heard. I still have to ask around for the details. Then why aren't you going? Emokun roared. Go take a look. Where did he send them to sweep the streets? These were all beauties that were 1 in 1,000. How could he bear to send them away? Emokun's heart ached terribly. If he had known that the pageboy was so unappreciative, he wouldn't have sent them over. Now, he didn't even know if he could get them back. The pageboy was so frightened that he rolled and crawled out of the door. By the time he crawled out of the door, he was already drenched in cold sweat. Recalling Lord Vassal Prince's instructions, he hurriedly ran to ask around. One of the twins, who were in their 40s, sneered. This person really knows how to waste God's gifts. Lord Vassal Prince, why must we rush over to make our presence known in front of him? Let's not talk about whether this person can return to the divine continent. Even if he can, there's still eldest young master and second young master. The twin laughed sinisterly. Can't we just follow behind and watch the show? Emokun rolled his eyes. His voice was somewhat indignant. Previously, I was so frightened by him that I lost my composure. Now that I've regained my senses, I won't show such cowardice. He's just a crown prince who hasn't been acknowledged yet. Lord Vassal Prince sneered. When he returns to the divine continent, he'll get it. Then why did Lord Vassal Prince invite him to a banquet this time? Emokun gritted his teeth. Originally, I wanted to connect with him, but now, I think that he's an unappreciative person. Isn't that so? The middle-aged man chuckled. Our old vassal prince is someone who has the right to speak in front of the emperor. TSK, someone like him dares to look down on you. Emokun raised his hand and stopped the middle-aged man from continuing to flatter him. He asked with a solemn face, Where's Abiao? Where the hell did he go? My reply just now was completely brainless. Is the crown prince coming or not? Not long after, the manservant who had left hurriedly ran back and bowed in front of Emokun. Emokun waved his hand impatiently and asked, How is it? Where did he throw those beauties to? And tonight's banquet, is he coming or not? If this fellow really didn't give Emokun any face, then that humph. When he returned, he would immediately report to his father and ask his father, the king of Giant Pain, to come forward and complain about this fellow to the great emperor. When the manservant Abiao heard this, he hurriedly knelt down with a plop and said in a trembling voice, reporting to Lord Heir, His Highness the Crown Prince, he. What about him? Tell me. His Highness the Crown Prince ordered a steward to keep those beauties in the guest house where they're staying, to wipe the floor, wipe the stools, and pour the night incense. Smack! Emokun, who was burning with rage, smashed the cup in his hand. Say that again. The manservant. Whoa, this wasn't something that this lowly one arranged. Chapter 2204. If you keep getting angry at this lowly one, will that accomplish anything? Wouldn't that be of no avail? The page boy criticized him incessantly in his heart, but he didn't dare to show it on his face. He could only smile obsequiously and say, "The beauties have all been left at the inn." Emokoan immediately jumped up from his seat and smashed basically everything that could be smashed in the living room. He then exclaimed in exasperation, "This punk actually doesn't give me any face. The beauties that he sent over. Never mind that he didn't accept them, but he still brought them back. Not only did he not freaking return them, but he even arranged for them to go to the inn to pour night incense and whatnot. Only this emo fellow could do such a thing. Oh wait, that's not right. This Emolian fellow could do such a thing." Emokoan was burning with rage. He paced back and forth in the living room, stepping on the porcelain shards beneath his feet. Crunching sounds could be heard as he stepped on them. "Lord Vassal Prince. Scram. Yes, yes, this lowly one will scram right away, right away." As if he had been pardoned, Biao frantically ran out without a care in the world. "Come back." Emokoan roared angrily. Biao turned around as if he had lost a parent and bowed to Emokoan, asking, "Lord Vassal Prince, do you have any other instructions? This emo fellow doesn't give this young master any face at all. Go and bring everyone back from the inn." He wasn't freaking sending them off anymore. Was this how these beautiful young ladies tormented him? He, Emokoan, had painfully parted with them to let that punk enjoy them. But in the end, smack, 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 he was slapped in the face. Emokoan paced back and forth in the living room with his hands behind his back. With a long face, Biao timidly asked Emokoan, "Lord Vassal Prince, are you sure you want to do this? If the people who were sent out were to bring them back, if this matter were to spread to the divine province, it was guaranteed to become the biggest joke in the upper-class circle." As a subordinate, he was completely thinking of Lord Vassal Prince's face. If he did this and Lord Vassal Prince was mocked in the end, the first unlucky one would definitely be him. Lord Vassal Prince definitely wouldn't say that he made the wrong decision back then. Then the one at fault would definitely be him. Biao. Go! Yes, yes, yes. Biao bitterly turned around and was about to leave. The immortal-like couple walking towards him scared him so much that his legs went soft, and he knelt down on the spot. "Your Highness the Crown Prince." The Crown Prince cast a sidelong glance at him. "Haven't you seen my Crown Princess? Greetings, Crown Princess. May the Crown Princess have good fortune and peace." Biao immediately lowered his head. He had a strong desire to live and lay down. Wasn't the Crown Prince's aura a little too strong? Prince Emo grunted. Holding Arbor's little hand, he stepped on the broken porcelain pieces on the ground and walked in front of Emokoan with a faint smile. "What's wrong? A floor full of fragments to welcome me?" Emokoan shrunk his neck inexplicably and slowly moved closer to the twin bodyguards. Greetings, cousin-in-law." Emolian looked at him coldly. Emokoan was speechless. How strange. Suddenly, he felt as if the entire hall was covered in ice. The air was so cold. So cold. Emokoan took another step back and smiled inexplicably. "Cousin-in-law, you're here so early. This younger brother didn't come out to greet you." Emolian glanced at him. There wasn't a hint of a smile in her eyes. "When I walked to the door just now, I heard you say something about returning something to you." Chapter 2205. You tell him. Emolian glanced at the page boy Biao, who was kneeling on the ground. "What do you want to return to your lord heir?" Biao's forehead was drenched in cold sweat. Hey, my uncles, hey. I'm just a page boy. Why did this fire inexplicably come to me?" Biao didn't dare to answer casually. He lowered his head and said in a low voice, "Replying, Your Highness, the Lord Heir didn't say anything." "Emokoan, why don't you tell him?" Emolian turned around and looked coldly at this younger cousin of hers. It was said that the king of Jianping was his father's favorite youngest brother. In the imperial capital, the king of Jianping's status was second only to his father. Therefore, these sons of his were considered to be very precious and favored by the heavens. The king of Jianping's heir was ranked third and was the legitimate son of the king of Jianping's family. He even had 2 concubine-born brothers above him, and seemed to be quite capable. This was the information that Emolien had received for the time being. In the end, Emolien didn't need to care about these people at all. His status was there. As long as he returned to the Divine Continent, all the princes and princesses would have to give way to him. The king of Jianping's heir only wanted to go home and find his father, but he took a step back in fear and instantly regretted his careless words just now. It was just a few beauties. If he gave them to his cousin, the crown prince, he could do whatever he wanted with them. For the sake of these beauties, he had to go against the crown prince. This was not a wise move. Emokuan didn't know that in Arbor's eyes, his current appearance was instant cowardice. The crown prince actually had such a cowardly brother. Arbor immediately glanced at her husband with disdain and rubbed her little hand hard against his palm, wanting to pull it out. The crown prince, that every time he saw his younger cousin, he freaking felt vexed. Jojo didn't seem to like his cowardly cousin. Not only that, he seemed to despise him every time because his cousin was too cowardly. Prince Mo, who felt very wronged, became angrier the more he looked at his cousin. The king of Jianping was a hero of his generation. How did he raise such a coward? Your Highness, the crown prince. One of the twins suddenly spoke and cupped his hands towards Prince Mo. Prince Mo glanced at him coldly, his gaze landing on him. Who are you? I am Lao Hai, the personal bodyguard of the crown prince of Jianping Palace. This is my younger brother Lao Jiang. The middle-aged man called Lao Hai said faintly. I have a few words, but I don't know if I should say them. What status do you have to speak to me? Prince Mo's eyes flashed with a cold light. It was so dark that people couldn't help but feel frightened. Lao Hai's face darkened slightly as he suddenly took a step forward. Xiao Mu only felt a gust of air slanting toward her. He is indeed a bold person. Emolien raised his hand and pulled her into his embrace. With a flick of his sleeve, he completely waved away the spiritual energy that Lao Hai released. At the same time, a cold light flashed in his eyes, and a fire arrow shot out from his sleeve. With lightning speed, it shot towards Lao Hai's face. Lao Hai was shocked. He didn't expect the crown prince's speed to be so fast. It was already too late for him to dodge. As he rolled on the ground, his left arm was already pierced through by the fire arrow. That speed was so fast that it was almost impossible to see with the naked eye. Lao Hai wanted to react, but it was already too late. He opened his mouth and cried out. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.